We're going to get started at 9:03. Call this meeting to order. As we gather here in Beaumont, we pause to acknowledge the land that we're all blessed to live and work on and to honor those who came before us. We value the enduring relationships with the Indigenous peoples who continue to share their history, knowledge, and culture with our community. We're also thankful for the generations whose dedication and faith helped shape this community into the vibrant city it is today. I'm going to start with the adoption of the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any additions to the agenda?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we do have the following that will be adopted with the agenda. Addition of bylaw 1093-25, 2026 fees and charges is attached to item 3.1. Bylaw 1094-25, borrowing bylaw attached to item 3.2. Change sheets added to item 3.3. The service level workbook and presentation and attachments to item 3.4. The recommended 2026 consolidated budget to the 2026 just one second, sorry, my apologies. Consolidated budget and attachments added to 4.1. Department presentations added to item 4.2. The 2026 municipal capital budget presentation and attachments added to item 4.3. Utilities budget presentation added to 4.4, and the library presentation added to 5.1. Copies have been printed, and councillors should have received all of those copies this morning, and the information has been published to the public portal on our website.
Thank you. All right, so Councillor Hyde.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. That the November 19th, 2025-2026 budget presentation and deliberations agenda be adopted with the following. Add bylaw 1093-25 to 2026 fees and charges bylaw to item 3.1. Add bylaw 1094-25 borrowing bylaw to item 3.2. Add change sheets to item 3.3. Add service level workbook and presentation and attachments to item 3.4. Add recommended 2026 consolidated budget and attachments to item 4.1. Add department presentations to item 4.2. Add 2026 municipal capital budget presentation and attachments, item 4.3. Add utilities budget presentation, item 4.4. Add library presentation to item 5.1.
Thank you. All right, so any discussion on any of that? By the way, is Councillor Tellenboss online? Awesome. Hi, Nathan.
Hey, Mayor.
Good. Okay, so we're going to do a vote now. You'll have to do yours verbally. So everyone vote.
In favor.
In favor? Okay, we're missing one person. I'm only showing 5 here, and Nathan is 6.
Mayor, did you vote?
I did. I pressed it. Oh, there you go. I had to press it 3 times.
There you go.
Thank you. Approved unanimously. All right, so we will move on to the additional materials right now. Madam?
Moving on to the business items with 4.1.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to 4.1, recommended 2026 consolidated budget, and I believe our fearless Jay is going to do the presentation. Are you number 8? Is that yours? Oh, Ollie? Gotcha. Sorry. Number 11, I think.
Thank you. Yep, that's it.
CAO Schwartz.
Thank you very much. The mayor, all of council, members of public, those in attendance and those online. Welcome to the most important process in municipal governance. This is the toughest decisions that you're going to make. It's going to set the stage for the vision and everything you want to do. One thing I've noticed in my career is you can talk vision, you can talk strategy all you want. but it's the ability to turn those into actions through a budget process that exceptional communities are able to do. A colleague of mine, Tim Duhamel, just recently published an article on budgets, and there was a line in there that I just want to recite because I think it's perfectly sets the context. And he says, thriving municipalities don't just have good luck or a great location. They have strong financial foundations rooted in disciplined, thoughtful, and well-structured budget processes, both operating and capital. That's what we're trying to build here. You'll see over the next 2 days, at the deliberations next week, at the open house, that administration is not here to sell you a budget. This budget has to work for our community, and that includes every one of us in this room and online and in this city. So we'll walk through some processes that we've been developing and that are getting better and better each year, that are not perfect. Welcome all of your questions. We've got a lot of horsepower in this room and online today to be able to answer your questions. We recognize it is your first budget, so don't be afraid to dig in, and let's pull this out together. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ollie.
Thank you, CAO Schwartz. Okay, Ollie. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mayor, Council, and members of the public. My name is Ollie Morrison, Deputy CAO of Internal Services and Chief Financial Officer. Today, we are pleased to present the 2026 proposed budget. These 2 days will include a presentation by Jay Bahachik, our Director of Finance, outlining the challenges and opportunities that the city faces. Department presentations from each department director who are present here in chambers, and presentations of the capital and utility budget. The intent is to provide council with the opportunity to ask any questions, receive additional clarity in preparation for the budget deliberations next week. When deliberations are complete and any adjustments are made, the operating capital and utility budgets, as well as the fees and charges bylaw, will be approved. If you have any motions that you would like to do that would be other than actual changes to the budget, please send those to the city clerk, and we will be bringing those forward next week during deliberations. And we can provide clarity for that along these 2 days as to that process. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison. Go ahead, Jay. Oops.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Jay Bahachik. I'm the Director of Finance. I'm happy to be here today. This is my personal Christmas. This is the thing that I work for all year round, is really to get the budget approved. All those other things like reports and payments and things are really byproducts of this process. This sets the direction for the organization for the whole year, so I'm happy to be here. Just want to, a couple opening remarks on transparency, focus on maintaining service levels, focuses on maintaining our assets, and the biggest portion is around long-term financial sustainability, right? Setting the city up for the future. As I go through the presentation, please don't hesitate. There's, tipping my hand, there's 63 slides, and keeping all your questions to the very end might be challenging and losing the context of questions. So if you have questions through the presentation, please don't hesitate. I'll kind of leave a space at the end of each slide before I go on to see if there are questions. It's better to address them as we go. So we're going to go on a little bit of a journey before we get into the budget. This budget really focuses on that transparency piece. Part of that is the narrative and explaining the administration's position and where we are. So where we've come from. So Beaumont has experienced historic growth since 2019. We're averaging 5% a year, and we are one of the fastest growing municipalities in Alberta. We also came through, like everybody else, came through the pandemic. So a couple of years of difficulty, municipalities across the province and globe, honestly, we're all faced with the challenging times. Most administrations, and ours included, focus on minimizing service and financial impacts to residents. It was really about just keeping the lights on, keeping the base services going, and keeping taxes way down. One of the byproducts of the pandemic was inflation. So there was supply chain challenges, both on operations and capital. So we did see significant inflation on CPI, and we'll get into some slides later on there, as well as on the capital side, so supply chain hyperinflation, so the BCPI is Business Construction Price Index. And so we saw massive inflation. On the operations side, our reserve position was significantly impacted, as most municipalities were, as they leveraged those reserves / savings accounts to manage those financial pressures during that time. But then one of the other elements is that construction prices went way up, and that's one of the challenges that we're facing. So it's, as it says, almost 23% increase in a 2-year window. And so where are we now? So it's really about acknowledging our reality. Our assessment base is predominantly residential. We have significant growth pressures that compete with existing services and infrastructure demands. The economic environment remains challenging. So between things like the tariff situation, global conflicts, regional, provincial politics, it's a very dynamic environment, and it makes things challenging to forecast from a financial lens. And then the other piece, so with the BCPI, that the 23% increase and then more after that, normally the market would reset after a period of time. So during the supply chain shortage, the hyperinflation that led to that, but that bubble didn't pop. And so as a result, the prices stayed where they escalated to, and now everybody's trying to play financial catch up. So that just means that Beaumont, we're at a crossroads right now. We have the opportunity to make some decisions that can move us positively into a sustainable manner in the future. So all is not lost, but it will take courage and discipline. And then, so where do we want to go? So all of this is leading up to, this is one of my principal pillars of finance for me, is the long-term financial sustainability, right? So the idea that we are self-sustained, we have reasonable, predictable, consistent tax rates. We set Beaumont up for generations to come. We leave better than we found it. We want to have reliable, valued services. So we want to continue to deliver the council-directed levels of service. We want to maintain what we have. There's a number of analysis out there that speak to, you could not repair a road for a number of years and just run it till it fails, and then you have to replace the whole thing, as opposed to steady, scheduled, routine maintenance. You can extend the life far, far beyond the original life for a fraction of the cost of replacement. So that's really a pivotal piece of what we want to do. And as I mentioned, the reasonable, consistent, and predictable tax rates. We want to be self-reliant, resilient, and sustainable. So how do we plan to get there? Really, this budget is a short-term pain, long-term gain plan, right? So we want to do this budget correction over a couple of years. And you're going to see the term right size throughout the budget materials. It is a term that we've used repeatedly to represent the underfunding in the past, and that this is what we need to do in order to move the funding required to deliver the services that we provide at the level that they're supposed to be provided. So there you'll see in some of the department presentations that some service challenges that each department faces, and some in delivering that, some of its resources, some of its volume. But this budget is supposed to right size over a couple of years to get us where we need to be in order to deliver what we deliver. And then the other real important piece is around strategic reserve and capital investments. Because of the high optics of budget with residents, with the media, And the one area that is always seems to get the most attention is the operating budget tax increase, right? So in order to keep that number down, it's very common for municipalities to short themselves or neglect the fiscal management, the putting the money away, the capital side of the business. And it's often because it's very difficult for the residents to see the value for money. To increase a service, a public-facing service, and you say, we're going to get one more resource to do this thing, the residents see that and they're like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But for us to say that we're putting money in the bank to build this road 2 years from now is much harder for the resident to wrap their mind around at the time, as opposed to it's very costly to build it at that very moment. So we want to focus, so we need focus and ongoing contributions now, so this year starting and then into perpetuity, and that will lead to long-term financial sustainability for the city. And then, so yes, my pillar moment, so it's foundational. Sustainability means no reliance on outside resources. I know that a lot of the municipalities in the province relied heavily on some grants from the province to deal with their capital infrastructure. Over a period of years, that has eroded, where like 40 to 50% of what it used to be, and indicators say that it's going to continue to drop. And municipalities are struggling to get their own funding in place to replace what those things were doing. The idea of that grant was to maintain existing infrastructure and not to build new infrastructure. It was really about keeping the lights on. And when that drops off, now the municipalities need to pick up the pieces and run with that. So we want to be sustainable. We want to be flexible, right? So we want to be able to respond both to opportunities and challenges. We've seen that both. So pandemic is one example, but also the school site, right, last year. So that was an opportunity, and having money in place and to be able to pay that and take advantage of opportunities is important. So that's part of long-term financial sustainability. And then we want to minimize our vulnerability and risk. And so we do that through establishing financial strategies. So through this budget, we are starting a reserve replenishment strategy that's tied very closely to the comprehensive growth plan. We do financial modeling as a part of the comprehensive growth plan and offsite levies. So the next two slides are really going to demonstrate how municipal finance is really not that complicated when you break it down into simple layers. It's very much like household income or household finances. As a household, you have income. That's your paycheck from work. We call that revenues. You have your day-to-day expenses, your groceries, internet, clothing, and those are usually tied to CPI, and that's similar to our operating expenses. You have one-time investments, so you need a new car, the furnace needs replacing, you want to remodel your kitchen. Those are capital in nature from a municipal perspective, and then you have your finances. So you have your checking and savings account, you have your credit cards, you have your retirement plan, you have your education plan. These are similar vehicles as we manage to the municipal side with transfers. So we flip the coin and we look at it from the municipal side. So municipal finances, we have our income, right? But it's different. So we have property taxes, user fees, franchise fees, other things like that. And the challenge is that public perception is that this should be somehow tied to CPI, right? So the revenue stream that comes in should not be tied to CPI. CPI is on the expense side. Revenues need to manage a larger envelope of things. So we have our operating expenses, that's our residents day to day, and our operating expenses are things like snow removal, heating, electricity, road maintenance, and these are closer tied to CPI. So there should be a correlation between our expenses and CPI is more reasonable on our day to day. We also have capital, right? And so that's the business construction price index that I talked about earlier. And those are one-time investments, and so those are the assets and infrastructure we need to deliver the day-to-day services. So, snow plows, buildings, roads. And then our finances, we have reserves and debt, which is the equivalent of the checking and savings account sorry, blanking. And the the retirement and education amounts. So that's a little bit of where we've been and where we want to go, and a little bit of the theory, and then we're going to talk about some of the things that we've been seeing. Pardon me. So this graph represents, so I talked about, oh, that's unfortunate that the labels broke. The gold line is annual CPI, so that is the inflation annually, and sorry, it's unfortunate that the numbers broke. So it's 2019 is number one, and so it's the years after that. I'm sorry, we'll see if we can get that fixed later. But so the gold line is CPI annually, and then the blue line is the cumulative. So when you add 1 and 2, you get 3. When you add 1, 2, 3, you get the 7.6. When you add the 1, 2, 3, 4, you get 13.1. So that blue line is the cumulative CPI over the last few years. And you see that since 2019, we have 22% on CPI. Sorry, same problem. And so this is the BCPI. So this is the Business Construction Price Index. And so you see, so 2019 is number one, 2020, so on and so forth. You see that the 14.3 or the 12.9% in the gold and the 9.7% in gold was the 2 years of hyperinflation with COVID. And that was, the cumulative at that point was 24%. And you see that over the period of years, it's been 36%. So 36% and 22% has been the inflation factors that we've seen. Now, this is the orange line is the one that we want to look at. It is the weighted average between the CPI, which was the green line, and the BCPI, which was the blue line. And then we weight it because we don't, it's not an equal representation of capital to operating, so we only take 10% of the BCPI line. So when you weight those the inflations together, for the organization, we've been looking at about 25.7% of aggregate inflation. Now that's the orange line that still exists there, so it's 25.7%, and the gold line is our cumulative tax increases over that same period of time. So you see that the gold line until 2025, or this 2026 year, the budget, has been under the entire time. And what that means is that we have been underfunded and struggling to keep up with that, the rate of inflation. And just in this last year, if we get the tax increase that we're requesting, would we finally catch up and begin to start recovering some of that shortfall that we've been facing? So this is the aggregate. Would we be able to take a recess and just reload it with a different copy? This would be much more easier if you could see what the residents could see what the
Okay.
data should be. If we could have,
So we take a 5-minute recess?
please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
All right, welcome back. So I just want to make note to the public as well that there will be a new document uploaded on the website that is an updated version that we just realized we needed. So I'm going to, first of all, want to say welcome to everyone here who's watching online as well. And Nathan, you're still with us?
Correct, yeah.
Councilor Natellan Boss, awesome. All right, we're going to turn it over to Jay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for council's indulgence while we address that little technical glitch. So appreciate it. So we're going to back up a little bit just to go back.
Sorry, one question, Jay, I forgot to mention, and if you could please, for the public's purpose, explain what CPI and BCPI is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So CPI is Consumer Price Index, and it's the rate of inflation on basically household goods, your milk, bread, clothes, gas. It's a national indicator and a regional. They do it in different areas, but it basically the inflation on prices or on products with no change, right? So it's a cost increase without changing quality of the product. And then BCPI is the construction version of that. So it's the building construction price index. So that's the BCPI. And so that'll be for things like concrete and lumber and steel and things like that that households don't buy, but it's very germane to the capital environment. So thank you for allowing me that opportunity. Okay, so we're going to back up. So going back to the start of the economic considerations. So this will be much easier to see now what I'm talking about. So you see the tax rate increases, the CPI line is how much inflation has been over the last few years, and then the blue line is the aggregate total of that. And then the BCPI, so again, as we went into COVID, there was a massive supply chain shortage, and so inflation, so it was 12.9% in 2021 and 9.7% in 2022. And then you see it drops down to 3.6 and 4.3, but that's still inflation. The prices aren't coming down. That chart is a little bit visually tricky because even though it looks like inflation's dropping, it's still actually going up, and that's that blue line that comes up to 36% at the end. So then when we look at, as I talked about the weighted average, right? So because the entirety of our budget is not a 50-50 split between operating and capital, it's not fair to weight the inflation assumptions in the same way. So the assumption is that roughly 10% of our operating budget is capital, so we take the weighted percent of 10% of the blue line and add it to the green line, and you get a weighted average over the period of years. And so from 2019 to 2025, it's been 25.7% weighted inflation increase that the organization has faced. Now, when you add that, there we go. So when you compare the inflation versus what we've been provided for as far as tax revenue income, so you see that the orange line is still the weighted average, but the gold line underneath is how much the aggregate tax increases have been. And you see that as we move forward from 2019 until 2024, we were under inflation the entire time. And then in 2025, we finally, with this recommended budget, would be over the aggregate inflation. And then the logical question is, well, why are we over? And it's just because we need to start catching up, which we'll demonstrate on the next slides. So this is a theory slide, so don't get hung up on any of the numbers. It's not, that's 40 million is just a nice, very round number. I said 40 million for the operating budget and 4% or 10% of 4 million, 10% is 4 million, so it's 44 million. So that would be the theoretical base budget. And so in 2018, let's just assume that the funding matched the cost of service. And then in 2019, we were just a little bit underfunded compared to what inflation would have been. And so you see the $0.3 million shortfall. And then in 2020, we're still shorted again a little bit. Inflation goes up. And now the total aggregate, the cumulative gap is 0.8 million. And then in 2021, it happens again. In 22, it happens again. You see that we start to slowly come into a situation where the over time, that cumulative funding gap represents $7.2 million in 2024, and that we would still be short a little bit, even with in 2025, you see the green line is above the blue bar. We're still in the hole over that entire period of time. Now, this is just inflation. It doesn't count for growth, which is on the next slide. So when you add in our growth at 5% per year over that same period of time, you see that the funding gap is actually quite significant, right? And so that's not to say that it's cost us $30 million or will cost us $30 million. It means that we've been short funding. So either we've been using reserve dollars to prop up service, or services have begun to slowly deteriorate or degrade or not be fully delivered, or we're incorporating more risk into some of our business, right? So maybe we're letting assets run a little bit longer than they should, or an asset could fail sooner, and we're not doing as much maintenance. So the aggregate total cost, whether it be operating or capital or service or reserves, is about $30 million at this point. So that's the catch-up piece that we're trying to really undo at this point. So let's look at our reserve schedule. This makes an assumption. So the opening balances is an assumption based on what we project for year end. That was based on the Q3 report that was shared November 10th. November 10th was the Q3 report. The numbers themselves aren't that important as much as the colors on the table are. Okay, so as part of the reserve update that happened in August, we established that through policy, there are mins and maxes, or floors and ceilings, that provide a range to what a reserve balance should be. Some of the reserves don't require, or it's not applicable to have a range, where the reserve is just the balance of what it is. If we get, for example, if developers give us money for municipal statutory land, that's just, it goes into the bank, and then we don't have any control over that, so it's not applicable to have reserve. But lots of them, around our stabilization and contingency reserve, capital infrastructure, these are things that we do control and that we should have a range. And really the takeaway here is that we don't have a single reserve that is within our target optimal range, right? There is not a reserve balance on the right side that is green. We have some orange, which it's not great, but it's not bad. And then we have some red, which requires serious consideration. We're well underfunded in what we should be doing as far as contributions. So to talk a little bit about surpluses, deficits. Unlike the province and the feds, municipalities cannot budget for deficits. Good budgeting methodology says you should target.
Sorry, we just have a question. I'm going to interrupt you here. Sure. Councillor Van Newkirk.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for backing up a slide here. We had a conversation in this room in September around updating, making some updates to bylaw, and I'm just wondering if you can speak to that a bit, Jay. Basically, there was a proposal to consolidate the reserves. That's what's in front of us right now. And then there was also a conversation around the ability of administration to move, without council's approval, up to 10% of reserve balances to balance reserves. Can you comment? Has there been any requirement to move or balance as we've got to this point right here? Or is this just the opening, or is this just, ground zero and the opening of things? Can you provide some clarity on that?
Through the mayor of the councillor, thank you. That's a great question. As our Q3 update that we provided, so part of the, let me back up a little bit. So in August, we did a policy renewal, a new reserve policy through council was approved. In that policy change, we did consolidate some reserves, as councillor mentioned, and we changed some of the things around the optimal ranges, as well as provided administration the opportunity or the authority to sometimes move dollars within reserves in order to manage pressures and optimize balances. That was at a 10% threshold, and part of the policy is that administration will present throughout the year, so at Q2, Q3 budget and a year-end close, will disclose any of the reserve redesignations that we may have done. As of Q3, which was on November 10th, administration did not recommend any changes or redesignations for in the 2025 year. As part of this slide, we will be, and with the budget approval, we will be redesignating some of these balances as laid out on the reserve redesignation column. So we'll be taking $2 million out of the municipal infrastructure lifecycle reserve and moving it into the municipal capital and the general land reserve, right? So it's about balancing that. And so this will be, and again, on the utility side, we do the same thing, but this is seeking, part of the budget approval is getting council's authority to move this, but administration also has authority to do that with compliance reporting to be done subsequently.
Yeah, thank you. And why I highlight this is there was concern in the community around that ability to move 10%. So in summary, we have a new we have a new way that we're looking at the reserves. They were consolidated. There hasn't been any execution of that 10% removal to this point. And what's in front of council right now for the second time in the last 3 months is the reserve balances. Anything that changes in here will change as part of this process and will be part of an approval by council. So I just want that to be very, very clear to the public because there was some concern around that conversation that we had. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Van Newkirk. I do have a question regarding what would be the reason to put $1 million into general land reserve when it really hasn't been utilized a lot in the past? Like, it looks like it's pretty low frequency in that.
So to you, Madam Mayor, the opening balance doesn't indicate usage. It indicates what's left. So we've done some strategic land purchases in the very recent past that have used up some of this money. And so this is about putting some money there that if we do have an opportunity for a land purchase that benefits the city, that we are positioned and ready to go. So it's that balance is just what's left. We've done some significant land sales through there, and this is about putting some money back in to make us still viable to do things.
Okay, thank you for that. And so that's what would be the optimal balance range then?
No, so even with that $1 million, we'd be well under the optimal balance range.
Okay. Councillor Colesmith.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the color coding here, though, within optimal range and below. Is there a graph somewhere that shows this trend over the last few years, similar to the CPI, that these were, maybe 2 years ago, everything was in the range, and then last year, is this a surprise this year, or was this trending this way for a number of years, like something to give that indication?
Much later in the presentation, there is some regional comparator slides, and so one of the reserves is reserve balances or reserves compared to reserves per capita, and we'll be able to see that trend later on in the presentation.
Really good, thanks.
All right, continue on, Jay. Thank you.
Okay, so back to surpluses and deficits. So as I said, municipalities cannot budget for surplus or deficit. It must be a balanced budget. Best practice when establishing the budget is to target between a 4% and 6% surplus. When you say that as a percent, that seems entirely reasonable to the average person. When you apply it to a multi-million-dollar amount, so let's say that on $50 million, 4 to 6% is between $2 and $3 million. When you say that to someone, that's a lot. That's a wide margin to miss by, but not on a $50 million budget. So remembering that surplus and deficits are not largely the dollar value as much as it is the percentage variance, right? So we try to never err on the side of taking too much risk. We always try to what we need plus just a little bit in case, right? So that's that 4 to 6% buffer. So that's best practice. Actual revenues and expenditures never match, to be honest. So that will always result in a surplus where either we have excess funds or a deficit, which we're underfunded. Usually, so if we have excess funds, they're usually allocated to a reserve to be held for the time when we are over budget, right? So if we have to fund a deficit, we put money into the reserve and then we take it out of the reserve to manage the cash flow. And it's required by the MGA that any deficits have to be covered immediately in the next year. So a little bit about the reserve replenishment strategy I've been talking about. So this is a model of how it works. So I just demonstrate that we're asking for about 2% of the tax increases to support reserve replenishment, so that'd be about $0.6 million going into the base budget. So if you put it into 2026 in the top row, every year after that, that $0.6 million is in the base, and you will generate revenue off that one piece. So over a 10-year period, 11-year period, you're going to end up with $6.6 million. That's nice, but in order to really move the dial on finances, you have to compound it. So the following year, we'd ask for another 2%, and then another 2%. And so you see over a period, if you look in the 2029 column, let's say, after 4 years of $0.6 million additions, you actually end up with $6 million total dollars, which it would have taken you 10 years to do it if you just did it one time. Right, so this is a compounding replenishment strategy that we put in place in order to quickly facilitate reserve growth and capital infrastructure investment. Pardon me. And that this doesn't necessarily indicate that we have to do 11 years of contributions. It's about getting it up to a sustainable number. So ideally, probably in my mind, I would say probably the target would be 5 or 6 years of these increases to build in, so like a $3.5 million contribution annually. And then as we talk about capital as we go forward, that we have a real infrastructure gap that we'll need to address, but this would help move that along quite well. Some of our deferred revenue. So there are outside sources that the municipality is able to access and pay for some things. Common nomenclature, so government transfers is grants, right? So there are, we have 4 grants listed. I'll talk a little bit about each one of them. So the MSI initiative is a grandfathered grant program that was rebranded as the Local Government Fiscal Framework, which is the 3rd one down. So we are planning on using those dollars up in this year. Those grants, I guess I'll back up a little bit. Those grants are non-competitive, so we are entitled to them and allocated to from the province and the federal government. They're based on formulas, largely per capita. But for example, the LGFF, the CCBF is base $50,000 and then a per capita allocation, right? So we end up with $1.5 million as our proportionate share. We don't have to compete for those. They're given to us, but there is structure around what we are allowed to spend it on. There's strict guidelines on what they're eligible for, and they make sure that we have to apply and get approval from the granting body, and then we can fund our projects with it. So that's MSI and LGFF are provincial in nature, and they largely deal with infrastructure management. So there's asset management as an eligible thing, rec, roads, administration, vehicles, lots of things like that. There's a minimum threshold that you have to spend on a project before you can use it. And then the CCBF is more around technology, green space, environment, transportation, things like that. That's from the federal program, and so they're a little bit more rigid in what they can be spent on, but again, it's our choice on what we apply for. And then the 50th Street Highway 814 agreement is, like in 2003, the city got control of 50th Street, which was technically a provincial highway between the borders, and so the provincial government gave us around $4 million for the next 20-some years of maintenance and repairs. So we have $800,000 left on that account to do work. So we'll be looking at maybe adjusting some of the funding. Another funding source, so that was the grant side. So that's given to us by granting bodies, or has been given to us by granting bodies. There's also there's competitive grants too, which we don't have any entitlement to and aren't on this piece, but we could apply for. Let's say there's a grant announcement for, I think there was one for tree planting that we were successful in getting this year, right? So we put in an application, yes, we're rewarded, great, we spend it on the thing and we do it, but we're not entitled to it, and it's not part of a sustainable funding perspective, but there's a competitive grants, and the city is always looking to leverage and maximize and get as much grant dollars as we can in, and we're always looking at every opportunity and where it can make sense, but they're not reliable or sustainable from that perspective. You're awarded and win them on a one-to-one or a one-by-one basis. Offsite levies is part of a larger conversation around development in the community and the obligation to pay for certain parts of infrastructure. So as a development comes online and maybe it would require a road expansion because of the volume of residents, the developer has an obligation to pay dollars to the city called through levies. And so we collect those dollars, and there's a very complicated process to determine how many dollars and what is appropriate and all those pieces. But they end up coming into accounts. So we have arterial roads, we have water and wastewater are the 3 buckets that we have. Sometimes, so you see the projected or the opening balance in the water is actually in a deficit position. And so that's where we've had to there's been construction to move an item along, but not enough development levies have come in to collect that. And that's not uncommon for that to happen. Sometimes the administration or the city has to front end and move things along. So that's why the water's in a deficit position. And then you see, at arterial roads, for example, is in a good position. Developments happen, and we have money collected, and so we're planning on spending some of that this year, right? Are there any questions on this slide? Not seeing.
Yes. Councillor Murray, go ahead.
Thank you to Mr. Brahedchuk. I am looking at the government fiscal framework and just looking at the amount from last year, which was approximately 8.7 million. So those were just funds that were used up for certain projects over the past year. Are we expecting to get a larger number at any time?
So through the mayor to the councillor, sorry, you said 8.7 million?
It's not on this slide. I had to go to the 2025 budget, and it was 8.7 million.
Oh, of the planned spend for 2025? Is that what you're talking about? Mm-hmm. Yes. I came to the city just over a year ago. One of the things I looked at when I got here right away was around grant management and usage. And so I made a policy change about the way that we apply for grants and execute them. So there was a little bit of a backlog as far as unapplied grant dollars. And when I came in, normally I like to get them approved as part of the budget. And so last year there was a balance, and I don't do them retroactively. It's more risk involved with that. So there was a large, in 2025 budget, we planned to use as much dollars as we could to save the city finances as much and get those dollars out the door. There is a 6-year window that you have to spend the dollars, and it's on a first in, first out basis. So we get an annual allocation. So if I look at the LGFF framework, we get $2.8 million this year. So that we would have 6 years to spend that $2.8 million, not counting the following year's $2.8 million and $2.9 million. And so there was a little bit of a backlog. So we burned that all up. And so you see the opening balance for 26 is only $600,000. So we're well under there's no risk from us to not have spent our money within the right time. And you see that we actually spend a little bit more than our allocation, or we'll plan to spend a little bit more than our allocation next year as well. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. It was more about the Canada Community Building Fund than the local government fiscal framework, but I understand it's the same principle.
Same principles apply, yes.
For both.
100%.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Hyde.
Thanks very much. I have just some questions around the levies and such like that. Obviously it's not something that we can count on totally each year coming in, like as far as the money coming in from developers and such like that. So you're projecting over a few years here, 2026, 27, 28, sort of an idea. Are you just looking at an average over that for offsite levies, or are you how are you balancing that out with offsite levies if we don't really understand how much we're going to have coming in?
That's a loaded, large question. So we do have a very comprehensive, as part of the levy model, we have forecasted of when we think particular projects are going to come on, and we've worked with developers so they're comfortable with the timeline. And so we have some reasonable projections of the money coming in. The challenge that sometimes you have, so that we have in the capital plan this year, we have a major water infrastructure. So you see the $4.7 million in the far right column there, the levy supported debt in water. There is a requirement or a need for the city to move this capital project along, even though we haven't collected levies for it at this point. And it will be ultimately paid for by the developers through levies, but it needs to happen before the money comes in. And so in that situation, we'd be taking out, financing it through debt, and then the levies will come in and collect it and pay the debt off. So it won't be any burden on the municipality from that perspective, but it does impact our debt position. Just the timing and development of growth, this is how it's impossible to predict and always know the cash flows. Markets heat up, they cool down, the cash flows change. But generally, we know how much each piece is coming in. We know what the levy rates are. We know we can forecast what we think the revenues are going to be. And then it's just the application from time to time of making sure that matches. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think that the 4.7 million will then move into a debenture for us, but it will be paid for by levy, right?
That is correct.
And will we break out the debentures between what is paid for by levies and what is paid for differently?
Yeah, so we have municipal debt that we take, we have utility debt that we take, and then we have levy debt that we could take, right? And so there is we would track it differently and pay for it differently depending on what kind of debt that it is. In this situation, it is fully levy financed. And we do annually report on that as well through levies, levy report.
And I think it's very important to be transparent around that this debt is being paid for by levies, this is paid by this, and such like that, so that the population knows that this is going to be paid for by future development and future levies and such like that, so they understand it.
And things like the interest is also calculated into the levy calculation, and so the developer is paying for the financing costs and everything. It's just we finance it for them, and then we're recovered wholly through the levy process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyde. Just a follow-up question to that. And so is there a timeline because you said this is something that has to happen before we actually have the money from the developers. Is this a project that's slated for 2026 or to be used up?
Yeah, to you, Madam Mayor, yes. And we'll talk about that later in the capital presentations, but yes, it is planned for 2026. Okay. So as we talk about debt and debt considerations, so debt is not a funding source, as we just talked about, so it is a financing vehicle. So it can be paid for through municipal property taxes, it can be paid for through utility rates, or it can be paid for through developer levies. The use of debt is not applicable in every situation. You can't, for example, pay for operational work through debt. You shouldn't buy computer hardware through debt. Like if the asset only lasts 3 years, you don't take a 20-year loan to pay for it, right? It should align with the useful life. It needs to be a physical asset. You should do at least 15 years. Our norm is 20, but you can do up to 30. Sustainability guidelines. So because debt is a little bit like your credit card, but not quite as flexible, you can take debt out, and we have ability to draw, and we have comfortable debt capacity at the moment. But it needs to last 20, 25 years, that whole balance, right? And so to target, we should be targeting annually to spend around $3 million with debt. Now, it doesn't mean you can't spend $30 million if you need to, but that just means that you probably shouldn't spend a whole bunch of more debt for 10 more years until you kind of catch up and bring the balance back down. It also doesn't mean that if you don't spend $3 million this year, that is gone. It just means that you are carrying a little bit more, and you could maybe spend $6 if you needed to wait a couple of years to do a thing, right? So it's about using it. We don't want to be afraid to use debt. We want to use it where it makes sense, but it also needs to be strategically thought out. As far as MGA limits, so there are limits both on the debt, the balance, and then the ability to service. So on the balance, it's the 1.5 times. The MGA legislates that it's 1.5 times our municipal revenue. And so if you're thinking about if you go look at the consolidated financial statements in the budget document, don't be fooled and take that whole total line, because things like government transfers or third-party contributions aren't ours. So we record the government transfers in as a revenue because we need to from a budget perspective, but it's not municipal. We don't own that. And so you can't just take the simple calculation of just take your revenue and multiply by 1.5 and know that that's what our debt limit is. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So that's the MGA limit, is that for municipal best practice, we should limit our limit, right? So the MGA says that you could have, I'm just gonna use a made up number, so we could have $100 million, right, is our debt limit. Internally, we should limit ourselves to $75 to $80 million. We should never go above that. We should carry that 20 million, 25 million just in case of, as we learned through things like the pandemic is a thing, or forest fires. We had a grass fire. We're not really in a floodplain here, which is to our advantage, but they're natural disaster events that can seriously impact infrastructure, and it's not cheap. And so to have that money just in case is best practice. You don't want to tie it all up, and then you spend all of your debt dollars last year, and then an event happens this year. Then what do? You don't have any way out. So, and then the other consideration is we also want to use it for intergenerational equity. So you try not to reserve fund all of your capital infrastructure, because you have to pay that up or build that up over time. So if I'm a resident and I lived here for 20 years and I put my taxes are going into reserve dollars, and then they're going to build a facility tomorrow, but I move tomorrow, all of my money that I've lived here just went into that, and now whoever moves into my house is going to get a free ride on all of my taxes that I've paid for this new facility that becomes operational. Where if you use debt, the people who are living in the city for that year, their taxes pay the debt payments that year. So it's on a year-by-year basis. Whoever's living here is paying for the debt as they go annually, and it's much more fair as far as usage, as opposed to just using the reserve piece. So I can't see what I says under there. It's hiding. So debt repayment is paid annually, and it aligns with the user pay methodology. Okay, so it's visually simple, but it's pretty
Sorry,
powerful.
Jay, just going to interrupt you there.
Yes.
Councillor Van Newkirk has a question.
Yeah, just wanted to highlight, during the debt conversation that, later on in our document for proposed, there's, are we going to go through where we're at on debt? Like, is that the intention later on? Like, it comes up in page 56 or something of our documents. Are we going to have further conversation on it, or is this the debt conversation right now?
We'll talk about it again a little bit with the capital presentation. We're talking about particular funding, so we can dig into that. This is more of just an overview. We can dig it into the capital presentation.
Okay, I'll save my comments for later.
Oh, sorry, one more. Go ahead, Councillor Hyde.
Yeah, so on that debt side of it as well, I know we're going to get into it later on page 56 there, but levy-supported debentures are what we talked about already at the $4.7 million level. But tax-supported debentures, is that similar to, like, let's say a bond that says in future payments you're going to get back from taxable from taxation? So there's quite a bit of it, of course, on that side of it, saying that that's going to be paid out over, let's say, 10, 20, 30 years, sort of an idea. What we're basically saying is that is going to be paid by taxes.
Yeah, so for any municipal tax-supported debt, yeah, so we would do a borrowing bylaw, same, there's one in here for the levy one, but we would do a borrowing bylaw that says it's going to be this amount of dollars over this amount of term, and it will be supported by annual payments of this and this with interest, and that will be supported by taxes, yes.
Okay, and will we get a detailed breakout of what those debentures are?
The history of the existing ones? We're not recommending any new tax-supported debt at this time.
No, but history of what we're actually paying for at this point, sort of an idea. Like, where is that debt?
Yeah, I don't have it handy, but I'm sure we can pull the numbers of what our current debt servicing is right now.
that'd be great, just so the public knows what we're paying off on that large number and what type of debt we have on and what it's going towards. Thank you.
No more questions? Okay, continue.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start with the lines. So as I talked about a little bit, the MGA limit, so projected based on what we think our budgets are going to be. The red line is what our maximum debt draw ability would be. The gold line is what we should try to stick to or not exceed unless in case of emergency break debt. And then the purple line that's through the middle is around our regional ceiling. And most of our, nearly all of the municipalities within the province try to stay below 40% usage. I don't know that that's, again, going back to that idea of keeping sustainable funds. So you just like to keep powder in the chamber in case something happens. So you see based on our 2026 budget, and that makes an assumption around the levy debt. So you see 26, that would be the budget and what we're asking for. But then we have some more debt coming on, planned to come on, pardon me. So there's some levy infrastructure, there's a fire station, and there's a reservoir that is in the long-term plan that would require debt funding as well. And so administration projects that if we do those things which we deem critical for the city, that would really escalate us. We'd be like 75% of our available internally limited debt capacity, right? So that would really impact our ability to fund anything else from a debt perspective for a number of years until the ceiling grows and our debt balance drops down a little bit.
Just a question here. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just if you could speak, Mr. Bohachek, to the regional ceiling. That's the piece on this graph that's not 100% clear to me. Is that what you mentioned as a 40% or?
So the regional ceiling that no one really wants to go over. So Edmonton and Calgary go over, they're a little bit bigger, but everybody else tries. I don't know if it's intentional or not. I assume that it is because of the principle of we want to have sustainable debt into the future. Municipalities are reluctant to exceed that unless for good reasons.
Okay.
So we deem recognizing that ceiling, but still recognizing that fire and water are primary needs for the city. Though that would be warranted to break that ceiling for what we need to do.
Yeah. So sort of along the ideas of we have general best practices, but the best practice in a given 4 or 8 year segment of time might shift compared to in the long run.
Yeah, these are not limits. The red one is a limit. The gold one is a limit we should probably try to adhere to. But that doesn't mean we couldn't go over if the situation required it. Mm-hmm. And the purple one is just a regional comparison of how other people are spending their debt. Ms. Morrison, I think you had something.
Yes. And it's related, you said, to kind of those general principles of best practices.
Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Morrison.
I just wanted to add that when we propose to take on debt, we look at that very, very carefully. And based on the principles that Mr. Bohachek has set out. And most Albertans are a little bit debt averse, and we would probably feel the same, and other municipalities. That's why you see in the region that ceiling, everyone's very cautious in taking on debt. And so when administration will be bringing that to you, it is definitely for a specific purpose and need, with full explanation as to the intent of that debt and, of course, how it will be paid back. So just wanted to emphasize that we take on debt very, very cautiously.
Thank you for that, Ms. Morrison. Any other questions? Councillor Murray?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just curious, and this may be a question that is slightly out of the scope right now, but I think it's important to understand. With the offsite levies, what percentage of these future expenses are we expecting to recuperate from those? Or maybe better worded is what percentage do we expect as a city to be covering, for example, the future fire building? Is it supposed to be covered by, say an 80%, 20% split, or?
So through the mayor to the councillor, that is a brilliant and complicated question. So the offsite levy model and working group and the policy bylaw that came forward in late August, early September this year was approved, is super complicated working group. So the developers and administration, we had consultants all help building the piece. And so each particular asset in the model is looked at and says, what is the benefiting area of this one piece? And so it might be, so the fire stations, we have 2 coming up in the long-term plan. They're not even the same ratio. Depending on where they are in the city, one is largely new developer driven with a little bit of municipal support, and on the other end of the city, it's largely municipal with a little bit of developer. So it depends on where the asset is, what the asset's doing, how it's servicing each piece. And so every single item in the levy model has been worked on and agreed upon through administration and development to agree that, okay, it's a 62-38 split for this one, and it's a 71-29 split for this one, 100% for this one. And so each one is itemized. And so everyone, so there is detail there, and we can defend and explain why the ratios are. For the current one that we're looking at for the debt usage, 100% developer benefiting area. So they are in it. So if it was 80-20, then maybe we'd have to pay 20% of that debt. But this, the 100%, the developer levy project. So entirely levies recovered, funded. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. If I could just backtrack, I've my wizards in my computer have answered a question for Councillor Hyde. So at the end of 2024, we had $35 million of debt. 23, and again, these are round numbers, these are obviously decimals, but about 23 is the BSRC. About 9 million is the Innovation Park. 1.3 for land for roads, 1.9 for the police building, and 1.1 for the operations building. And then there's 0.9 million for utility, water and reservoir programs.
And is most of that debt over 10, 20, 30 years? Do we know where that's
can
at?
confirm, but largely over 20 years would be your
Largely over
standard.
20 years,
Yeah.
that debt. So it's debt servicing for mostly those larger projects then,
Yes.
I would imagine, sort of an idea. So, my thoughts are that if we do, or when we do, sell the Innovation Park, that debt will come off as well, right?
So that's an option, or we could repurpose the debt depending on interest rates. So that's when that happens, we will definitely look at our debt situation, what current borrowing rates are, what interest rates are. It might be to our advantage to put that all in the bank and make interest off it and just pay the debt servicing off, because if the interest rate that we could earn is higher than the interest on the borrowing, it just makes more, we're making money to not pay it off. So
Yeah.
we'll look at that when that happens and come to council for approval of whatever the recommendation is.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Is it possible to get maybe that list that you just called out?
We can provide that supplementally, yes,
Provide-
but
Perfect.
just for the conversation.
Yeah, awesome, thank you.
Mayor, may I?
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Ntalamboss.
Thank you. Just a quick question for Jay, just in regards to repurposing that debt. If I understood correctly, in the last guidance we were provided, is that that's basically a no-no unless there's special circumstances. Can you confirm that?
So through the mayor to the councillor, yes. So there is, it is a number of hoops we must jump through and requirements we must meet in order to do that. But it is possible that we could repurpose the debt.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. Any other questions? Okay, continue on, Jay, please.
Okay, so talk a little bit about the revenues that, from an MGA perspective, that the municipality has access to. And so this pyramid represents the rough proportion of the reliance and sustainability that the municipality relies on. So starting at the bottom, working my way up. So the least sustainable, as I talked about earlier, is grant dollars from third parties. From a sustainability perspective, it's about being reliable and consistent. We don't control grants. The granting body decides whether or not we're going to get them. So it's nice when they do, but we shouldn't plan our fiscal health around reliance on those pieces. The next source of funding in the budget is municipal reserves. This is something we're paying for from our own savings accounts. It is acceptable to do that and is usually applied in two situations. Either we're trying to smooth taxes over a long period of time. We don't like to see, from a tax planning perspective, we don't like to see a roller coaster. We don't want a high number one year and then a reduction the following year, then a high number, then a reduction. That's not good business. We want to try to smooth that out. Or we like to, and part of that exercise is funding one-time items through reserves. And that helps keeps the tax rate smooth. The unsustainable part of this is that you have to replenish them. And so you basically, all you're doing is you'd have to increase property taxes or taxes in following years to recover that reserve money that you already spent. So you're basically, it's more of a funding or financing vehicle to pay for something a little bit now with your reserves and then recognize you're going to recover it through taxes over the next few years. But again, you can't long-term fund your operating budget from reserves because it's like a snake eating a tail. It doesn't get anywhere. Franchise fees, while sustainable, has limits. So franchise fees are percentage rate riders on natural gas and electricity distribution that the city puts on the providers. There are MGA legislated limits that says the maximum what the rider percentage that we're allowed to do is. We are maxed on electricity and near max on natural gas. So it is sustainable, but it's not a growable piece from that perspective. If we have a revenue shortfall, we can't just be like, I'd like to exceed the limit to bring in more. Investment income is more sustainable in that it's in our control, but it is, so it's the money that we make off of our reserve balance and reserve position. Right, so we get taxes in on July 1st when all the property taxes are paid. We put that in the bank, we generate income. We have our reserve balances, that's generating income. If we spend all of that money down and there's no money invested, we're not making any income. So the sustainability perspective directly relates to our reserve and financial position. Next is user
Can I
fees.
just ask a quick question there, Jay?
Certainly.
So on the investment income, will we get a breakdown of how our funds are invested? I know there's only certain vehicles we can put in because, of course, they are guaranteed. But how they've done over the last couple of years would be nice to see, or even over last year. I know we had a shortfall again for several different reasons, but market fluctuations, all that kind of stuff. I understand that, but if we could have maybe more of a detail of how our funds are invested and where they're invested and how they did over the last year or two, just percentage-wise, would be nice to take a look at that piece to understand it a little bit better.
I can do that, but the short answer is we don't have a very mature and sophisticated investment strategy. Most of the money, if not all the money, is just in the bank generating bank interest from that perspective. We haven't leveraged a large number of our portfolio in medium and long-term investments from that perspective. So just that's a short answer, but we can definitely provide a written response as well.
Is that something that we're investigating for the future? Yes.
So the first priority when I came on was ERP and revamping the budget process. The investment side and policy work will be the next priority on our list. Yes.
It certainly would help us out with our compounding over the next few years.
You bet it would.
If we had a proper investment strategy going forward. Okay, thank you.
So user fees and charges, again, reasonably sustainable. We control the amount. We set the charges and the rates for usage within our municipality. However, the economic law of diminishing returns says that there is limits to this. So I could charge $1 to enter any facility here and use it, and usage might go way up, but we're not generating much money. Or I could charge $1 million to enter a facility, and we would get zero usage. So it's finding that somewhere in the middle, that sweet spot of maximum usage with maximum cost recovery, and that's something that the administration works to do through our fees and charges, and we always want to be within the comparable with the region. We don't want to be charging less than everybody else is in the field. We don't want to be charging more generally than anybody else is in the field. We want to stay competitive with the region. We look at all sorts of market indicators, what the market can bear, all sorts of things. It's not just a thumb in the wind trying to guess what the thing is. There's a significant analysis that goes into setting what those are. But again, we do control that, and it is more sustainable from that perspective. And then the last and most sustainable that we have full control over is property taxes, and that's the plug at the end of the day that after we assess all of those other revenue streams, it gets us to a point, and then whatever the remaining balance is filled by property taxes. So the more that you can fill up that bucket with everything else, that's great. But at the end of the day, whether it be small or big, it's property taxes that balances the budget in the end. I'll show a little slide a little bit later on that talks about what our current ratios are in the budget. So again, a little bit of verbiage. So the government transfers, so they're competitive and non-competitive, largely capital focused, as I mentioned, and they're heavily restricted, but they're out of our control, and the trend has been going down. Transfers from reserve, we have finite funds in our reserve, so it's not sustainable. We use it for tax smoothing and one-time projects, and it does require replenishment through property taxes. Investment income, so you can't grow this revenue stream without significant reserve balances to invest. It's challenging through fluctuations in balances and interest rates, and the municipalities are strictly regulated in what we're allowed to invest in. We can't play the stock market, for example, things like that. So the MGA legislates that the municipalities are super risk adverse in our investments. So like treasury bonds would probably be the most exciting investment that we can seek. I talked about franchise fees, so that's our rate rider. We are at maximum on electricity and nearly maximum on natural gas. So user fees and charges, I talked about, so it's set, it's part of the budget. It'll be the first thing that we pass next week when we're approving the budget. So we pass the fees, rates, and charges, which entitles us to the revenue that we have in the budget. Will now be confirmed, then we'll pass the budget. It supports the user pay and cost recovery principles, but as I mentioned, there's the law of diminishing returns. And then property taxes, which is our last and primary source of funding. And it's the only true sustainable source of sustainable funding that we have. So then this is that slide again, but with some percentage breakdown, right? So 3% of our budget is for grants, 2% through reserves, 7% franchise fees, investment income only 2%. And then really the lion's share, user fees and charges at 40% and property taxes at 47%. So that's in your presentation package. You don't need to scribble those numbers down. Okay, so then we talk about revenues. So it's a really important one, I think, that we have to go through. Every year, every municipality is the villain. Just to be frank, I am like the Darth Vader of municipalities because I get to present the bad news every year and be the bad guy. But the reality is that we're set up a little bit for failure as far as sustainability. So the province and the feds never ever announce a tax increase. Well, almost never. And why is that? It's because they're making more money every year based on basic economics. So the population grows, there's more spending. Inflation happens, people make more money. Right, cost of living goes up, they're making money on income tax. So between those two streams, people get more money, they spend more money. Both governments are making more and more and more every year. Compound that with the ability that they're allowed to run a deficit from time to time, and it's always good news, relatively. The municipal disadvantage is that we're always asking for more, or almost always, right? So we have two primary revenue streams. As I mentioned, so the fees and charges and the property taxes. Property taxes don't inflate, and it's important to understand that if the residential market gets hot and property prices go through the roof, we don't make any more money. We're still making the exact same money that we would have made last year, that we asked, that we budget for, and we collect the amount that we asked. So last year we asked for $28 million. We asked for that. It doesn't matter if between the time we approve it and we collect it, that the market's super hot, we're still only collecting $28 million. We're not collecting 34 because the market went up. And if the market falls, we don't collect less. So we're revenue neutral from that perspective. And that's good for sustainability, but it's bad from, it's good from risk adversity because we're protected, we're insulated against inflation and deflation. But it doesn't help us with the whole every year, why are they asking for taxes again? Why are they asking for tax increase again? It's because we don't have, everything else goes up. Cost of living goes up, cost to provide service, cost of contracts, everything goes up. We have to pay for those things, but the only way to balance that out after all of our other revenue streams is property taxes. And so it's very important that we understand that property taxes aren't evil. I'm not really Darth Vader. And that this is just how the system works, and we have to embrace that this is the reality of what it is.
Sorry, just a question here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, Anakin. Yeah, I just wanted to take the opportunity here to say you're not the only purveyor of bad news. So most of Beaumont Council were joining with councils from all across Alberta last week in Calgary for the Alberta municipalities. And both Minister Williams and Minister Horner, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Minister of Finance respectively, had very frank conversations with municipal leaders from across the province. Minister Williams talked about navigating together in a boat through really rocky seas, and that it would be tough sailing for the next several terms, but we would get through it together. I think that's a fairly accurate summation of what he said. And Mr. Horner was more to the point. We're broke, is what he said. And so I think everything I'm reflecting on, hearing what you've said, Mr. Bohachek, everything's accurate with respect to what the province is doing. I think at the federal level and the provincial level in our system, they get to make bets with the promise of hopefully growing the pie of the economy so that people make more money and that generates more revenue. And those bets, if we're doing it well, pay off in the long run. But municipal government is not in that space. We're operating in the economy as it is, not working to nudge it in either direction. If I could, would that be a fair summary?
I can't dispute what you just said.
Okay, so I do want to pick a bone a little bit with what Ms. Morrison said earlier, that Albertans are debt averse. I think polling and sociological study of Albertans shows that Albertans are not debt averse, but very tax averse. And so current stats show that the ratio of household debt to disposable income in Alberta continues to rise. Is not at historic highs now, but it's creeping back towards that, and it's currently at 173.9, meaning Albertans are in debt $174 essentially for every dollar that they earn. Alberta is a place where we take risks, and we have a lot of entrepreneurs, and people see sometimes the benefits of being able to leverage debt to unlock opportunities to grow a business, to grow an economy. But some of the way we've done that is to bank over the long haul. We all talk about the Alberta advantage. And that's something, just to come all the way around here, something that I think we heard again loud and clear last week from the Premier all the way down through her ministers, is that we are in a time where we are headed through choppy waters internationally, nationally, and locally, and we are going to double down on that Alberta advantage. But that puts increasing pressure on municipalities. And so I just wanted to underline something that you kind of glossed over early on in your introduction, which is to say that even those grants, though we continue to lobby on every front for fairer, for the federal government and the provincial government to pay their fair share on the things that they're ultimately responsible for. Increasingly, they are in pinch to protect their, especially in Alberta, to protect that Alberta advantage, that low tax environment. I guess what it all misses is what no individual ratepayer misses, is that there is, at the end of the day, only one taxpayer. And so a lot of what we're hearing today and seeing today, and what, even after all the changes, what we're all going to feel when that tax bill finally comes, is these municipal taxes, this property tax, is the shadow side of the Alberta advantage. We hear that sometimes when people move from a higher tax place in Canada. That tax bill, when they first get that property tax bill, is a bit of a unwelcome surprise, but this is where the rubber meets the road. So thanks. I just wanted to kind of tie some of those threads together. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Penrod. Ms. Morrison, and then Councillor Hyde.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Penrod, for those comments. The item I wanted to add was as well that associations like Alberta Municipalities and other associations, and even across Canada, are doing a lot of lobbying to say that municipalities need a different way to get some of their taxes. Because this is, as you fully explained very well, it's a difficult situation. And so those lobbying efforts are happening, but have happened for many years, and no changes as of yet. And thank you for clarifying on the debt averse. I think that comment maybe is a reflection of my gray hair versus the realities of really what's happening right now. Thank you.
Councillor Hyde.
Yeah, and I think thank you, Mayor. I think it's really important to understand the difference between good debt and bad debt. We do this all the time. I even do it with my daughter, and saying there's good debt and bad debt. Credit card debt, not good debt. But household debt, which is attached to an asset, is not necessarily bad debt. And I think that's where the balance has to come into, is if we're going to use debt in any sort of way, it has to be good debt, which means it's tied to an asset. It's tied to something that's going to be relevant for the community as a whole. And that's what I'm looking at when I'm looking at debt. Is it good debt or is it bad debt? No debt is great, but if we have to go into debt for something, obviously there's something like that. We can't tie our budget to GDP of Beaumont. We can't tie that to anything like that. But councils, I hate to use fiduciary duty, but our whole duty up here is to make sure that we're spending wisely. And I think the big thing is to look at debt as one of those triggers and vehicles, but being wise enough to know that which part of it is good debt and which part of it is bad debt. And I think most Albertans understand that. The only problem is that we have very low interest rates. So Albertans and Canadians and people all over the globe are taking on more debt because it's cheap. It's less expensive to get 2% or 3% loans and such like that, until it goes up 1.5% or 2%, and all of a sudden you're paying $500,000 more. So it's a balancing act, and I understand that. And we don't want to get ourselves into a situation, for instance, when we talked about moving the debt from, if we sell the Innovation Park and we're using that, we may want to take advantage of a low interest rate structure, as opposed to looking at maybe borrowing in the future where rates are higher. So I'm just trying to highlight those two different things.
Thank you, Councillor Hyde.
Okay, I have just 2 slides left, and then we'll have a good time for a break.
Perfect.
Okay. So the last conversation is around Beaumont's assessment. So this is a year-over-year change that was current to 2024. You see that residential, the gold line, starting in 2020, was pretty consistent year-over-year change, 11, 11, 10, 8, that averages like 10.3. And then after 2020, the non-residential had some modest growth in the early years, and then a bumper crop in 2024 with almost over 22% increase. So that's fantastic work by our ECDEV partners to make that happen. But the challenge that we have is around what does that mean for on the assessment side? And I know that a lot of the conversation that I've heard in the public eye is always around, not even just here, but the more non-residential taxes you can, or business you can bring in, the bigger building your assessment, the better it is for the residential property taxpayer. And while that is a truth, the challenge that we have in Beaumont is that our residential assessment base is growing so massively that even a stellar bumper crop year by our ECDEV partners hardly moves the dial in ratio comparison, right? So we see that we're averaging, since the change in 27, you know, $1/3 of $1 trillion of assessment base, $1/3 of $1 trillion in assessment base annually. Sorry, maybe that's wrong. Yeah, that's millions, billions. Might have the wrong acronym. That could be the wrong acronym. 334 million. That's not billion. That's not 10, 100 times. Sorry. Get my head wrapped around that. So that should be a million. So 334 million. So $1/3 of $1 billion annually, as opposed to $24 million annually on the growth on the non-res. So while it is not, we would never eschew or turn down non-res growth, and that has definite impact on the dollar value of the municipality, and the expenses that we incur in every revenue stream is important to us. The perception that it will magically make property taxes go down for the resident is not a truth, right? The ratio percentage of, you would need 10 times that value 10 times annually just to start to bridge that gap, or to keep it from growing as widely as it is. Probably wouldn't even bridge it, but to slow down the desperation between the two groups is our challenge. And so, again, leveraging that, any non-res assessment growth that we get is awesome for the city. It's awesome for the residents. It's great for our budget and allows us to spend dollars on additional services. But it really doesn't move the dial on the tax bill that a resident would see.
Thank you. Councillor Van Newkirk.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you could expand on that. You know, there has been a narrative in the community, if we only had big box store A, or if we only had big box store B, you know, our woes would be over on that, right? Like, couldn't be farther from the truth, right? When we look at these gaps, you know, if we had 10 times the amount of box store A and 10 times the amount of box store B, we might start to keep up with residential growth. But maybe if you could just comment on that a little bit more, because I think it's an important piece for the community to understand, you know, especially as we fire up here a couple days of questions and deliberations on some, you know, tough decisions.
Thank you, through the mayor, to the councillor. So there's a number of nuances there. So if we assumed that there was unlimited land, first challenge, and that we could even bring on 10 times the box stores, you'd have to have 10 times the box stores every year coming on to keep, even to keep up with or try to keep up with the residential growth that is happening every year. $1/3 of $1 billion assessment growth every year is a massive amount. And so you would need something along the lines of like an industrial oil grader, or like a massive heavy industry thing, which would take years even to get off the ground, would have to come here and be right in our backyard in order for us to move the dial on that. You know, you can't have 27 Costco's and 57 Best Buys in the city, right? There's a finite limit that even if you get those one-time things, that's great and awesome for us, but it doesn't impact the overall ratio.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great perspective, and it does not at all mean that, you know, everyone up here's foot should be off the pedal, or ECDEV's foot should be off the pedal on trying to attract as much non-res as possible. Like that we need to do that. Commercial, industrial, non-res, that is a non-negotiable. we need that, and we will continue to seek that out, but just that perspective is very important. So thank you for sharing that.
Councillor Hyde, and then Councillor Murray.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Mayor. This does change the narrative a little bit. because as we've been out there on the campaign trail and walking around and listening to people, we understand that some people are saying, again, big box stores are the answers, we're going to offset our taxes. But we also want to keep our culture and keep our city, the way it is, unique for Beaumont. So there's a lot of people that don't want large box stores and such like that. So that comes down to changing the narrative to saying what type of amenities do we want in the city, and how much are we really willing to give up as far as the culture in our community and the look and feel of our community, and balancing that out. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that we're, of course, not wanting those type of services, but it's going to be up to council to decide what that vision looks like over the next few years. But obviously, it's not tax-based as closely as what people may think. So it's more vision-based in the type of culture and the type of services that we want in the city. So that changes the narrative quite a bit. So I just want to make a comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor Hyde. Councillor Murray?
Thank you, Mayor. Again, Mr. Bihuch, I'm not actually sure how to word this question, and it's very theoretical. So looking to the future, or even looking to the past, what has been the implications in terms of the extreme and sort of exponential residential growth that we've had? And can we, if it is slowing down, because at some point that's a possibility that it would have to slow down or would just slow down, how much will that affect as well, sort of our taxation? Would we have been able, obviously there would have still been some increases inflation-wise and that sort of thing, but would we have been able to keep that like at a different percentage, let's just say? Or can you speak to that in how that might look?
I'll pass that to my ActDev partner.
Number 7?
Yes.
Go for it.
Thank you very much for the question. I can't speak to the exact number it would change, but what I can say, and it's the one part we tend to forget a lot, is without the residential growth, we won't see the non-residential growth. So a big selling point of Beaumont, a big reason that businesses want to come here, is because of our residential growth. So if we had that slowed residential growth, it would have also been slowed on the other end as well. So just something to consider as we look at that.
Did that answer all of your question?
Sort of. Of course, I think everybody understands that, but it's cost us a lot of money to grow. So that's my angle and my kind of question in terms of infrastructure and that sort of thing. It hasn't been, free, quote unquote. So that's kind of the basis for my question.
I'll take probably first crack at it, and maybe Ms. Morrison will join in. Really, from my perspective, the way that you grow is critically important as well, right? So infill is a sensitive topic here and in other places as far as, generally people live here because of the style of the houses and the things like that. That's part of the draw. Why people come to Beaumont is, I have a nice house with a big yard and pieces like that. The cost to build that way, to grow that way, is exponentially is a strong word, but linearly and as a multiplier, more expensive than if you were to do densification development, right? You build just towers and towers of apartment buildings, 30, 50 stories like downtown, right? You can maximize and get, for very little water infrastructure, water pipes, you could service all of that, as opposed to one long pipe to a house here and one long pipe to a house there. That infrastructure is much more costly on a per assessment basis. And so I think that, back to the conversation around, we need the residential growth to attract business, that's true, but also the way that we grow is challenging from an affordability perspective.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question. Thank you, Thank you, Councillor Murray, for that, and for Jay for answering that. So I know that there's plans to make use of the offsite levy area to increase revenue and to, relieve some of the burden on the municipality in terms of cost of that, correct?
On the capital side, yes.
The capital side, yes. So I know that in the MGA, there's a provision that allows municipalities, like the natural persons power provision, to allow municipalities to create other streams of income. Is that something that would be considered or future to look at that? Or actually, maybe just backtrack that a little bit. Can you describe what are some of the opportunities that we might have to do that in the future, if we were to look at that, in terms of what is within the boundaries?
Through the mayor, I don't have any expertise in new revenue streams. I haven't heard of, other than a corporate controlled entity, is the only thing I've heard of, like are you like a utility provider, like an EPCOR or something, if you were into that kind of business? But I don't have any other expertise. So maybe Ms. Morrison has a comment on that.
Ms. Morrison?
Yes, I'm going to try and address a few items here, but maybe for you, Madam Mayor, there are some limited opportunities within the MGA. Most of those, and as Mr. Bohacek was referring to, a municipally controlled corporation, generally that is around a utility. So our very close example, the City of Edmonton and EPCOR, and they receive substantial dividend from the EPCOR operations. Other smaller municipalities also do have some of these items, but they are somewhat limited through the MGA. But it is definitely an area we can investigate. Then I would just like to go back to Councillor Murray's question, which is an excellent question, because growth has its opportunities and its challenges. There is no question about that. And Mr. Bohacek, mentioned that, of course, when it comes to infrastructure, supporting multiple single-family homes just takes more. There's more distance, there's just more, versus having one water line, maybe a bigger water line, supporting a higher density residence. So again, that a lot of, questions about what this community is, and again, as Councillor Hyde said, what do you as council in your term here would like this community to look like? And there's going to be a lot of opportunity to discuss that. And your question is excellent and a very complicated answer because of what decisions were made in the past and what we need to do now to address those and those growth pressures, plus then how we're planning for the future. So it is definitely a complicated question and a complicated answer, and council is going to have a fantastic opportunity to be looking at different things that will be coming to you. I believe even just in the short term, when you hear presentations from our ECDEV director and planning and development director, I think you'll be able to get even some additional clarity on those. So those will probably come tomorrow. So can hang on to that question for them as well.
Are you good?
Sorry, no, I'm gonna, just a quick one. I think this will be easy to answer. Where we are only just introducing offsite levies now, had we had more of that cost in the future, would this have been, obviously it would have offset the costs of infrastructure, for example, the water example that you just gave. Are we hoping that the offsite levies from now onward will also help to offset costs of maybe that single family home that has the larger space, as well as, some of the higher density?
I'll jump in to answer that question. One, please hold some of that. Again, for our planning and development director, she'll be able to give a much better response than we can. But just as a short answer, yes, we have had off-site levies. The new model that we have built does increase those off-site levies. But again, Kendra will be able to really respond well to that question.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison. All right, Jay, I think you got one more slide, or?
That was it.
That was it? Do you want to close out here?
Take a break.
Yeah?
We're going to get into the actual budget in a minute, so this is a natural breaking point.
Awesome. We'll do a 5-minute break. All right, we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Take
All right, we'll get started here. We need to wait for a few minutes. People come back in. Did you want to say something? Yeah.
If we're ready to proceed.
Okay, awesome. So before we continue on, are we going to go into the department presentations right now, or?
No, so this is still the continuation of the opening presentation.
Okay.
Department presentations will likely start in the afternoon after we finish this session.
Okay, so we'll continue on. All right, go ahead.
Thank you. So budget 2026, so the last 2 hours of excitement was all around like some history and theory and the struggles that we face as an organization, corporately from an economic perspective. Now the actual budget itself. So a little bit of a preface around what this budget is. So we overhauled, as I said, so I've been here just over a year. The first thing I did was take a hard look at the budget process and make some, I would say, some significant changes. Really, really one of the biggest changes is this process, actually. It was important for us to tell the story, right? So we're talking about service narrative. The story is critical. To just hand a package of numbers without context and story doesn't do the resident, doesn't do council, doesn't do administration any favors. So we really wanted to get into that, and you notice that it's not a number-heavy presentation so far, and we'll continue to focus on the words more than the numbers. The numbers by themselves don't tell the story. Did you know that 60% of statistics are made up? Yes. Really, it's about creating opportunities for dialogue between council and administration, right? And so then the other thing that I talked about earlier in the presentation was about right-sizing the budget, right? So it's really, as we want to present a budget that represents what the organization needs to maintain or return to service delivery expectations. Our corporate and departmental deficits over the last year and some really reflect the underfunding reality that we've been facing. And this takes the critical first steps towards a sustainable future. So a little bit, just going to highlight some elements of the finances. So you see we do have increases in both revenue and expenses that match at about $5.8 million. The biggest change you'll see on this slide is around transfers, and that's really all about the reserve activity, transfers to reserve, less reliance on transfers from reserve. It's about getting the finances where they need to be, and so you see that overall our net change is about $2.8 million, and that's largely, well, it's basically all about reserve activity. I want to clarify so that not many people might notice the little asterisk in the corner, the totals may not balance due to rounding. That's going to be a standard on all the financial slides. This is literally rounded from from the budget document itself. But you'll notice, particularly in the change column, so you have how does 5.8 plus and 5.8 minus equals 0. Then I subtract 2.7 and the answer is 2.8. That, for those who are scorekeeping at home, that doesn't add up. But if you look at the budget document itself, it's just due to rounding from the numbers that are in the document. So I don't want anybody to think that I can't do simple math. Again, kind of, so that this slide is on the consolidated, which includes utilities. This is on the municipal side. So again, you see that our revenues are not exactly pacing expenses. So revenues went up $2.6 million, but expenses grew a little bit beyond that. And again, the major change is around the reserve activity, reserve contributions. Again, reflecting that $2.8 million shortfall. Utility side is flipped a little bit, and it's different because utilities is a net zero operation. It has to fund itself. So you see that the revenues actually exceed expenses. The change actually exceeds the expense change by $0.4 million. And that's because we have to do reserve management through the rates and collect it through the revenues. So that is planned in addition to the expense costs and to purchase the water and supply the water and all those pieces. There is an additional element in the rate for reserve management, which is part of the standard practice within utilities to fund their capital infrastructure. So we'll talk capital. Missed that line. So the way that we presented the capital in the budget document is different than last year, but this is a direction that many municipalities are moving this year. Part of the challenge that municipalities have with procurement is the natural disadvantage of we've already published our budget on what we think we are going to be paying for a thing, and then when we go to procurement, wow, imagine the shock and surprise when the cost is at or even a little bit above what we planned on spending in the first place. It's tantamount to playing poker with your hand backwards so your opponents can see all your cards, but you don't know what they're holding. So we've changed the way that we're presenting the budget to the public. It's rolled up at a program level. It's about protection of Beaumont's financial interests, and so it's designed to counter the procurement disadvantage. We are prepared to discuss when we get to, there's a capital presentation probably in the afternoon tomorrow when we get to it. If council would like any detail around the specific projects and costs associated with that, we will go into closed session and be able to have those conversations for full disclosure that council is comfortable with all of those elements. But we will not, at time of budget, disclose those numbers. Now, after procurement for transparency to the resident and so on and so forth, we will, through our reporting process, after successful procurement, we will be prepared to divulge what the actual budget for that project was, how we're doing on spending, all of those pieces, so that there is transparency, but just not to not put ourselves at a disadvantage and give away money, to not disclose what we're planning to or be comfortable to spend on a project before the procurement. So that's just a little bit of change in process. So I'll take questions now.
Sure, Councillor Penrod and then Councillor Van Nieuwkerk.
Thanks, Mayor Van der Kwak. Yeah, just a couple quick, this is obviously a fairly significant change to the way that we're going about business. So I know that we did add in a previous budget process a procurement specialist to the organization. Is this advice coming from the specialist? I know we also added you, and so like this may be a piece that you're instituting, but just if you can get some clarity on that.
It would be a combination of a discussion with procurement, yes, is about what ways could how can we stop hurting ourselves within the confines of the procurement process and all the treaties and such like that. So how do we work to our best advantage? And so this is something that, again, we're not the only one in the region going in this direction. This is a larger move, I think, that we're tired of being taken advantage of, honestly, as far as the contracting and those procurement exercises. So,
yeah, would you characterize this move as being kind of an emerging best practice?
I would hope that it gets to be called that, but yes, we're definitely probably on the leading edge of this, but it's something that has been a thorn in my side for a couple of years, and I've tried to wrestle with the thing, and so this is, I think, a successful way that we can still be compliant from a procurement perspective and a transparency perspective, but with also the best interest of the municipality.
Thanks. And you've spoken a little bit about this, but I just want to drill down to it a little more. On an annual basis, like a Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 type basis, how and when would you anticipate us being able to go back to the community with kind of the results? Like at what point and when and how are we able to be accountable to residents more directly? I think it's pretty savvy metaphor to say, like, we don't want to be playing cards, showing everybody our cards. At some point, though, we do need to lay the cards on the table and show the community. We took this action, we changed strategies to get a better deal for Beaumont and our ratepayers. and here's the proof that that happened. How do you see that rolling out?
Yeah, so you mentioned it exactly. So through our quarterly reporting structure, so Q2, Q3, through the budget next year, you'll see whatever emergent pieces that we've done, and then through the year-end reporting. So procurement, I can't say that definitively by April 30th every year we'll have the first thing done and go. It'll be whatever has been procured and now is a live capital project or a live project will now be able to be reported on. And so here's your budget and your actuals and your variance, right? So we'll see those advantages throughout the year as procurements finish up. Some could take a long time. Maybe we wouldn't have something done until September if it's a really robust project, right? So I can't say definitively but at every junction, you will have our most current information provided the procurement's done.
Thank you.
Mayor, may I?
Just one second. I'm going to go to Councillor Van Newkirk first and then Councillor Natellenbos.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just want to really thank administration for bringing this forward. So this conversation has been a regional one since 2023 and 2024, and I think council brought bits and pieces of this idea forward at last budget, and here we see it coming to life. Because just to be ultimately clear on this, what was happening is we would have a capital budget that would say, we're going to build item A for 100 grand. We're going to do this study for 80 grand. We're going to do this thing for 60 grand. Guess what? That's the starting point for consultants and service providers to have their bids. And then they decide based upon the time of year, how competitive or not they're going to be in that process. So by us taking a step back here, some might say it's a reduction in transparency. Sure, I'll take that criticism to try and save a bunch of money for the municipality. The ultimate transparency on this comes on the back end of the procurement process, which we heard, right? So just want to be really clear, and thanks for teeing this up, Councillor Penrod, that this process is where we need to be. Thank you.
Great point. Thank you for explaining that. Councillor Natellenbos and then Councillor Hyde.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. I guess just in regards to the conversation that's been had, what are we anticipating in terms of cost savings by taking this approach? Is it a 5%, a 10%, a 15%?
Through the mayor to the councillor, there's no way to know what that is at this point. I guess it depends on the market and the thing that we're seeking at that point in the time. So there is not an expectation that we will save 5 or 10 or a static number. Everybody will be on a case-by-case basis.
Perfect. And I know you had mentioned to Councillor Penrod that we're going to measure this. So this will be disclosed to council in terms of percentage budgeted and actual cost?
Through regular reporting, yes, that will be. But we'll also be prepared to go into closed session to discuss the particulars of the budgets before approval for council's comfort.
Perfect. Thank you. And last question, just in terms of the cost savings that we're expecting to see, is the thought process to transfer that to reserve?
So in the way that we do our budgeting and everything from that perspective is largely reserve funded on the capital side. It wouldn't be transferred to reserve, there'd just be less coming out of reserve. So in both situations, it has a positive impact on our reserve position.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Natellenbos. Councillor Hyde.
Yeah, just a quick question on procurement as well. Through the mayor, flexibility. As we know, well, first of all, I'm really cheap, so I buy my winter stuff in the summer, my summer stuff in the winter. So I'm just looking at the different ways that we'll have flexibility now with the procurement officer saying, okay, are we going to take advantage of the 4 for 3 sale for the tires for whatever, and are we going to take advantage of 0% financing it when it comes up or something like that? Instead of tipping our hat and saying, okay, we're going to just go and get this. With this procurement, we should be able to see cost savings by being more savvy, I guess, and to understand, do we lease right now? Do we buy? Where does that come down into the budget, sort of an idea, as opposed to just throwing a number out there for a specific project or a specific piece of equipment? Can you speak to that with this new procurement process?
To the mayor and the councillor, so it's not necessarily a new process. We've been working to do procurement upgrade. We updated our policy just over a year ago and things like that. It really, it's not a change. How do I say this? We don't always, so there's a number of reasons why we procure what we procure, and cost is not always the bottom line or the heaviest weighted factor, right? So it's value for dollar, service, relationship, all sorts of things. And so through the procurement process, we have a number of ranking criteria, and we weight them based on the needs of the department and the pieces, and then so we comply with all of the procurement pieces. So yes, we will see savings. Will we know? And we always look for, deals, but the procurement compliance is more important. So procurement compliance, value for dollar are probably the two most important pieces, and that will sometimes make savings. But if it's not necessarily, there's an argument that, so, okay, I get 4 for the price of 3 right now, but if it fails in 6 months, but if I'd have paid 4 for the price of 4, that might have lasted 3 years. The value, the long-term value is not necessarily about the cheapest at the moment. So there's a number of considerations while we're awarding contracts and pieces through procurement. Dollar is one of them, and we always try to leverage where it makes sense and is best value. If it was all things being equal between two proponents, but one of them said no % financing, okay, then that might be the thing that tips it in the favor of their perspective. But it's not to just be cost is the bottom line.
And I can understand that. I understand it completely. Like, quality, of course, is very, I'm buying for long term. There's no doubt that I'm always going to be buying for long term, and sometimes I have to pay a little bit more for quality in order to have that long term. I'm just looking at the flexibility component of it and saying through procurement and such like that, if we need to wait 6 months to find or 3 or 4 months instead of buying it right away, is that part of the strategy to look at the flexibility of the procurement as opposed to just going out, grabbing the best quality, best deal at the time?
For sure, part of the procurement pieces is if the market is not favorable, then we look at not doing that activity at that time, and we would report back to council, say there might be a short-term service impact or something like that from that perspective. We aren't just blindly moving forward. We're assessing the environment all the time and doing what makes the best sense at any situation.
Ms. Morrison, and then Councillor Van Newkirk.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I definitely appreciate the conversations here about procurement and do appreciate council's direction, which would be a couple of years ago now, to add a procurement specialist to the finance team. That additional resource has been a great support to all operating areas, not only just in compliance, but just even taking care of some of that procurement work so that our operating areas can focus on operations. Of course, many of you are experienced in procuring larger projects. There is always a lot of factors to consider. And our procurement work that was done prior to the procurement specialist, we did do the same things. We were looking for value for dollar. We were looking for the best again, best deals we could get, protecting municipal interests, and taking into account not only capital costs in purchasing, but operating and repair and maintenance costs is another factor that you need to take into account when you're doing these purchasing. So I guess just overall my comment is that as administration, we're constantly seeking what can be the best procurement decision for the city at the time of purchase. And sometimes that would mean delaying a purchase. The impact of price increases over the last few years, it is we procured, we're going to decide not to actually purchase this. We're going to look for another alternative. And again, Mr. Lewicki will probably speak to a lot of this because so much of the large procurement and projects happen in the infrastructure area. So I just wanted to give an overall comment there.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison. Councillor Van Newkirk, and then Councillor Murray.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to, there's going to be a little bit of a theme here from me throughout the next couple of days, and I really want to work to provide some fact to some of the narratives that occurred in the last campaign. So here goes another one. So the purchasing policy, procurement policy, during the last update had a very deliberate ad, and that ad is as follows. Procurement authority is formally delegated from council to the chief administrative officer in accordance with this policy. So what that says is, we're able to have all the conversations we're having about procurement here right now. We approve the lump of money that is used through the procurement process, but very clearly stated that council does not have a role in the procurement process. So just want to really highlight that, and there was a really deliberate sentence put in, and I put the motion forward to do it, because there is not a solid understanding of council's role at times when it comes to procurement, and I'm just here to say that council doesn't have a role in it. So thank you.
Great for punctuating that. Thank you. Councillor Murray?
Thank you. A question in regards to, just to provide actually some clarity, with a procurement specialist, is that person going out and seeking bids, or are we still getting different bids on project, let's say a service type project? What's really the difference between the two besides having that physical person?
So through the mayor to the councillor, we have really upped our procurement game compliance, following procedure process, since the new procurement person came on last year. Now, they're not like a salesman that goes out and searches for things. There's ways that you're supposed to post your procurements, post opportunities requests for RFPs. So it's on the provincial site. I think it's called APC is the acronym. And that's where, when we're procuring, we post the bid, and that's where all the vendors, everything know to go to look for stuff. Right, and so they go and they're like, oh, I see that there's a bid for this, and then there's very structured about how they bid applications and all the compliance pieces, and so it's making sure that we're protected from a legal standpoint, compliance from the treaty perspective, that it's fair, that it's non-biased, all of those pieces to protect the organization, but not, again, not going out and seeking vendors to apply for things. That's not the role of how that works from that perspective.
Okay, thank you.
And to build on that, are you okay, Councillor
Yes,
Murray?
yep.
To build on that, each department also, will develop RFPs to get those requests for proposals, for equipment, for projects, and all along, and to Councillor Van Nieuwkerk's point, and Jay just nailed it, is we have very strict procurement standards that we must uphold to. So it's not a case of just phoning out the street and buying $85,000 worth of something because you know this person and you think it's a good deal. We have to show, and we're audited every year, and we have been for many years. But the addition of the procurement person has certainly helped relieve some of that burden off of the departments and standardize our requests for proposal and other purchasing pieces. One other comment I'd make around value for dollar is we also work with our regional partners if we're doing bulk buys. Sand and gravel is a great opportunity, is an opportunity there. Sometimes it makes sense to partner with a neighboring municipality and buy more and get a better price.
Thank you.
Thank you, CEO Schwartz. Councillor Hyde?
Yeah, just one more comment through the mayor. I definitely agree with what Councillor Van Nieuwkerk was saying about getting into the weeds too much. I mean, I certainly don't want you to come to me and tell me that, hey, there's a 4 for 3 going on or anything like that. That's not what my intent was. My intent was just to let the public know that there is flexibility within the program, and I understand that you guys have a tough job to do in procurement, and it was more transparency more than anything else. So please don't. I don't want you sending me the flyers in the mail. Thank you very much, guys. that's not our job up here, obviously, serve an idea. So I just wanted to make that intent clear that it was all about transparency.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, continue on, Jay.
So some of the considerations as we're looking at the multi-year capital budget, the current municipal renewal ask is our bare minimum required, and it reflects administration's primary priority of maintaining what we have. It does not reflect our asset management need. Instead, it reflects our funding constraint. The plan is, I gave, and full kudos to infrastructure and Mr. Lewicki, I gave them an impossible financial envelope to live within from a sustainability perspective, and this is the amount of dollars we had. And so he had to give me the super lean version of what he needs to do, not what the assets necessarily require. And as we had the asset management presentation on November 10th, and your council's aware that we have pressures in that regard, and there's a number of things. And one of the keynotes out of that presentation was funding. Funding is the thing that we need in order to maintain our infrastructure. So that's what this budget reflects. And so the capital budget itself, as we're seeking it, isn't full or wholesome of where it should be. This is what we are doing not to fail, I guess would be a fair way to look at what we're doing right now. There's some modest municipal growth. Again, there's limited available funding. And that impacts new infrastructure opportunities and pressures. We do have significant offsite transportation, utility, and fire developer levy projects. For 2026, the transportation levy account does have sufficient funds. As I pointed out on the previous slides, the water levy is in a negative balance, and the new fire levy, new this year, doesn't have any dollars at this point. The city is recommending that 3 major levy projects proceed, and that we would likely have to debt finance those. So again, being recovered in whole or part by developer levies, and that those 3 projects would use between $30 and $35 million of our debt capacity, and that was reflected in that debt slide where you see the big bump where we go over the regional ceiling, but we're still under the internal guidelines. This is a theory question. So talking about that asset management sustainable funding piece. So in an ideal situation, we are putting the appropriate amount of money into reserve to fund our infrastructure on an annual basis. And so it's a one-to-one relationship, and that's reserve contributions equals the asset management needs equals level of service. Like it's a very simple theory. The reality is this, that as part of the BCPI conversation with the building construction price index, that the volume has the cost to deliver infrastructure is significantly higher than it used to be. And as I said, our asset management program doesn't reflect the full asset management need at this time, that the asset management required is anticipated to be on a much higher level than our funding. And we will have to bring those lines together, either through increasing reserve contributions or decreasing service and the way that we treat infrastructure. So I'm not saying it has to be one or the other, but those lines need to end up like this in order for us to have a sustainable future. Again, this is just a reminder so that the BCPI did go crazy for a couple of years, and 36% higher than it used to be 5 short years ago, and that bubble didn't come back down. So that's why it's driving that big arc or a big trajectory on the asset side. Just a high-level overview of the capital plan. So on the municipal side, you see that we are in the $5 to $6 million range annually on the municipal renewal, but it does start to escalate in 2030. Municipal growth is fairly modest, in the under 5 as an average probably. But you see some major municipal offsite levy, so a little bit of construction in 26 or on transportation, and then we have a fire station scheduled starting in 28. So there's 3 years of levies for fire. That is going to be part of that debt financing conversation. On the utility side, you see that we're largely focused about $3 million a year on renewal. There's almost no growth. It's just literally taking care of what we have, unless the growth is offsite levy driven. And then you see, so we have a modest number of 5.5 in 2026. It's largely one project. And then you see a water reservoir starting in 2028 and 2029 for another big ticket item. So between the water infrastructure in 26, the reservoir in 28, and the fire station in 28, those are 3 big levy projects that will really impact debt capacity and usage if we proceed, which administration does recommend. So some of the funding challenges. So as I mentioned, renewal programs are significantly underfunded, and more data will help solidify that picture from the asset management project. Growth capital viability is limited. With the dropping grant funding and limited reserves, and with the likelihood of committing debt to other projects, there's not a lot of other things that we can pursue. Grants, as I said, are unpredictable at best, and the indicators suggest that the dollar values are going to drop still. As I said, developer levies, so 3 major projects that we're looking at, and then any other development growth would need to be developer-led. We would no longer be in a position to finance any activities beyond those 3 major pieces that we are priorities for the city, and then other development growth would have to be managed on the developer side. And then that does leave our remaining debt capacity extremely limited, and that we should target no other planned debt for around 10 years unless the situation changes. So then we'll just take a look at some regional comparators. So here you have a population comparison. So this is, we're kind of average in the group, other than the outliers. So Red Deer and Strathcona are quite a bit larger than us. If we look at growth, population growth percentage-wise, you see that Beaumont is 3rd from the left. So since 2009 to 2023, so about a 15-year period, Beaumont has almost doubled in size. And like I said, 3rd fastest growing. Our budget expense doesn't, we're in line with, I guess, the regional comparators, right? So from a little bit smaller than the Fort Saskatchewan, Spruce Grove, like they're a little bit bigger. So we have more modest budget compared to the region. But our expenditure per person, we're 6th from the right. So we are quite low in compared to the region. So this is the amount of budget that we spend per resident compared to our comparators. We then look at our revenue that we generate per comparators, and we're even farther to the right. We're the 2nd lowest revenue generated per resident. And those revenues can be property taxes, fees and charges, investment. That's all of the revenues collected, but we are underfunded, and it's particularly challenging that our expenses should be aligned. We should be 2nd lowest in expenses if we're going to be 2nd lowest in revenues, but this says that we're actually using some reserves to prop up the revenue side, and we're not bringing up enough money to match the expenses. So that's a little bit problematic. This is back to the conversation about the reserve balances and positions. So you see this is a comparison of reserve balances per capita. You would expect a little bit of post-COVID and the BCPI explosion that you see, for example, in Stony Plain and Spruce Grove. Their reserves took a little bit of a hit, but then they've stabilized and started to turn upwards. We continue to trend down. So our reserve usage continues to be relied upon, and we are running our balances down lower than everybody in the region on a per capita basis.
Jay, I'm just going to interrupt you here for a second. Councillor Natellenbos has a question for you.
Thank you, Mayor Vanderkwak. Just a quick question, Jay. You had discussed how potentially should we go ahead with some of the projects you had mentioned on the infrastructure side, that we would be using debt and we would be above our ceiling, that we would have to, any future projects would be funded by developer. What process are we taking now to see if any developers would be willing to help fund some of these projects that we're looking at currently, as opposed to entering directly into debt and funding it through levies?
So I'll start first and then pass to Ms. Raymond potentially for a follow-up. Basically, so we've been working with developers over the last year to come up with a new levy rate model, and we passed a levy bylaw that's based on current year's needs and expectations. Part of the conversation that we had with them was around, front-ending and financing, who's leading, who's doing the pieces. So administration has identified what we feel is the three biggest priorities from a growth and development perspective around fire protection and water supply as two critical functions of the municipality. That would be the largest or the primary focus for us. Anything further beyond that, so development into a new residential area or stuff like that, we couldn't be the first money in. It would be developers having to come up with partnering together, front-ending and just independently themselves, something from that perspective. So that will be part of ongoing conversations with developers as we go forward. And Ms. Raymond, do you have anything to add?
What number? Oh, 5, gotcha. Go ahead, Ms. Raymond.
Thank you, Mayor. To add to that, when we updated the offsite levy and we really worked on the methodology behind what type of infrastructure the levy was collecting for, because there's a certain expectation from the development community that when we help to aggregate these larger projects for them, like the costs, right? So we're sharing it amongst a whole group of people now, and the city is helping to steward that process through the offset levies. When we worked on that, there's an expectation now that what's in your levy, you're going to be able to reasonably develop, or maybe that will be them leading it. Sometimes it's going to be us leading it. That conversation is something that happens as we're looking at where are we growing. We're anticipating that through our conversations with the development community. And then we're looking at the levy model, what the predictions are, and where those high pressures are. When they come in and they start working through their area structure plans, they're doing servicing studies. We have our utility master plan that looks at how we're going to grow in the future. All those projects are in the offsite levy, but then we're having conversations because it's not reasonable for the municipality to be taking on all of that. Sometimes that is on the developer if they're going to be advancing into new areas. That's just the cost of that, but it's how they get paid back over time. So those are definitely discussions that are happening. We're working through the policy that administers that document right now in terms of when will we lead, when will we not, those different things, but it really depends on the project. So it's not reasonable to expect a private developer to front-end a $30 million water reservoir. But it might be for a couple of them to front-end a lift station. So there's just different costs, when you're looking at that, and different expectations. On that. So it's nuanced conversation. I guess we can provide a bit more detail into the philosophy behind the levy, but it was really trying to balance that. And we're really trying to come up with a way that's going to keep it really from hitting the books as much as possible. That's our strategy.
Councillor Nadellenbos, do you have a follow-up to that?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Penrod, and then Councillor Van Nieuwkerk.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a general question, Mr. Bohachuk, for all the comparator data that you've shared. Really helpful, I think, and gives a lot of regional perspective. What is the source for this comparator data?
So two different sources. There's a couple of different slides. You notice some of the fields. So one of them is we've pulled the financial statements from all of the regional areas for those timeframes. So this is off of their financial statements. Or some of the slides are from the Fraser Institute published a report earlier this year that had a bunch of comparator data from those are the 2009 to 2013 or 2023 slides. And that was from the Fraser Institute.
And is it possible, I recall actually getting that as kind of a memo through council. Has that been shared with everybody currently on council?
I don't think so, but we
yeah, if we could do that. And ultimately, if we could provide a link on our website for big nerds in Beaumont like me that want to read up on this. It's an interesting report, as I recall. So just starting to get primed for our budget open houses. We're going to get some basic questions from people. I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone who's knocked on any amount of doors recently in Beaumont. I just want to get some responses from administration as I prepare to answer some of those questions at our open houses, which I look forward to. Why don't we just stop residential growth? This is going back a few slides. Like we talked about the challenges of addressing that gap between our residential growth rate and our non-residential growth rate. Who wants to take a stab at that one?
I will go first and then pass it off. So there's a number of reasons why you wouldn't want to just close the doors. So one is that, as for the non-res side, for example, that companies that are looking to come in here want to see population growing. A stagnant population doesn't do them any service from that perspective. Another is there is, I think, a regional obligation, so part of the formerly dissolved EMRB, but the whole concept of the greater Edmonton region is that every municipality needs to take on their fair share burden. Part of that collaborating piece, if we're not going to be very well received in the region with partners, we want to collaborate with, say, Leduc County or Leduc on a service, but we're not taking any of the new extra costs that are associated with growth and just shifting it everywhere. They're going to not want to come to the table with us, right? Does anybody have another? There's a broad spectrum of things, but I'd pass it over if someone has an opportunity.
Go ahead, Ms. Kendra.
Thank you. This conversation has a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of different ways that we can be looking at it. We've talked before about the comprehensive growth plan and the importance of being able to manage the growth so that we're still able to provide the quality of life and all the reasons that we love living here in Beaumont and that neighborly feel. And what does that look like if we're growing at 2%, 4%, 6%, providing scenarios, being able to see what that looks like? Because I'm going to say, you know, if you're going to have a problem and you want like growth, it's a challenging problem, but it is probably your best problem in some ways to have than decline. Decline in a community is much harder to plan your way out of. You end up losing revenue, you lose your labor force, you start losing people, you have schools that start closing, you have people that don't choose to move into your community. It's not just about who lives here now, it's about what does your community then continue to be. You don't have the people spending money at your businesses, and now your business community is floundering. You don't have new investment coming in. Now, if we're talking about a reliance on some of that assessment growth to pay for city services, that's a shift to the tax burden back on the residential development that exists here right now. And because there's just less people to use that. And it's a high stakes environment of which you'll have very few people that maybe even have those deep financial pockets to be able to play in that market with us. So if we're looking for them to be able to front end some more of that infrastructure, they're not going to be able to afford it. We're going to have riskier developments maybe happening if we have any at all. But it needs to be planned, you know, not a free-for-all. It needs to meet with the city's expectations. That's work that you'll see through the budget when we're looking at our planning process and the municipal development plan and what's the vision for the community in the next 25, 30 years. To look at that, we've been putting in off-site levies, you know, they're 400% more than they were before. There are other things we've been putting in place. There have been fee increases as it relates to building permits and those sorts of things that will naturally slow some of that environment, but you're going to do that, you're going to decrease housing affordability and all sorts of other things that kind of come along with stopping residential growth. But that's stuff that we want to be able to provide you with that information on and that financial analysis because you're relying on assessment growth. You won't have it.
Yeah, thank you. It wasn't meant as a cheeky question. It just is. And I think most people, virtually everyone I've ever chatted with about this, are fully capable. It's just they haven't necessarily spent the time or had the dedicated time to really think to the next level or have people challenge them and give them some more information on this piece. So at the end of the day, it's just not like a start lever and a stop lever, right? There's a whole bunch of in between, and it's all about trade-offs. And my family, both my parents both came from southern Saskatchewan, and the towns that they grew up in are shriveling up and dying. And so I think I would rather try to manage the problems in Beaumont as much as they are problems as the ones in Kisby, Saskatchewan. So thanks for that comment. Similarly, and this one does catch up to the comparator data pieces, is why are property taxes in Beaumont so much higher than across the region? Because that's a comment that we get.
So we'll get to residential tax rate in a minute and then a couple more slides. So can I table that?
Sure. Yep. Thanks.
Councilor Van Newkirk.
Councillor Penrod opened the door for a shameless plug before the question that I have, so here goes. On community growth, the shameless plug for future support for the Community Growth Task Force fits right here, and this could be a place where that conversation gathers. So there's that shameless plug for future versions of this discussion. My question, Jay, directly on this comparator data. Budget after budget, there are two comparisons that are poked at in this community, and I've seen it time and time again. One is Leduc County, one is Strathcona County. So Leduc County, we see huge success in their non-residential. Anyone who drives a spine road just sees building after building, flat piece of land after flat piece of land, foundation after foundation, and they've really had great success out there, and I think it's amazing. And they're also sitting on some of the highest reserves in Alberta, right? And if you contrast that with input from Jay, what is Strathcona like? What does that look like, and how is that different than Beaumont? Because both of these conversations around Leduc County and Strathcona County are kind of outliers from where Beaumont is. So can you just speak to that narrative? Because I guarantee you those comparisons will be made in the community.
Through the mayor to the councillor. I don't know what you're talking about. No, I'm just kidding. So the challenge, and with any county, so not to pick on Leduc or Strathcona or anybody, but the population served versus the amount of non-res investment is usually upside down compared to municipality, right? So I hate to use the word standard, but a target that a lot of urban centers use is like an 80-20 split is a desired for res to non-res. Counties are usually upside down. So once upon a time, I worked at Strathcona County. The ratio was like 65-35, other way around. That 65% of their income came from non-res. But you have to have space and people to come in. So when you have a large flat space with not much res that you can build shop after shop and industry after industry and all these things, or giant oil refineries or whatever the big pieces are, that's where the industry goes to open spaces. We're a little bit a small urban island with limited land that you couldn't, would you have a giant oil refinery right next to like 243? Not probably going to be palatable, but the idea that any county is generally money rich, but because they have a lot of the industry out there and not a lot of residential services or costs from that perspective. So did I get all of your questions?
Yeah, you betcha. And to be completely fair, some of the bigger areas and bigger pieces carry bigger liability. The counties have a lot of bridges, and you might not realize it, but there's huge liability associated with bridge and bridge maintenance and stuff. Just as something that folks don't often think about. So yeah, thanks for those comments. I'm trying to anticipate some of the conversation in the community and be proactive during this question session to get something to reflect upon and for us to look back on, inevitably when we start to get the questions here. So thank you very much.
Just to piggyback on that, thank you, Councillor Van Newkirk. And just for the public record as well, I wanted to ask this question. Obviously, those comparatives have a higher non-residential base than Beaumont. And so is it fair to have a chart that compares us to a similar municipality?
We tried looking for that, and we can't find someone who's exactly like us to do an apples-to-apples comparison from that.
So like Chestermere, Morinville, Cochrane, would they be ones that they would be similar, you think?
I don't have the data to confirm that. We can definitely pull on that thread some more and see if we can come up with something, but I don't have that for you right now.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be a helpful comparison, just because we are comparing similar municipality demographic in terms of residential, or ratio, I should say. Thank you for that. So, Councillor Hyde?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just similar to that question, the question we get asked mostly is around taxation and services. So, yeah, I'm paying this tax, but I don't have these services, and all these other municipalities do. For instance, Leduc, let's say, or something like that, as a hospital, they have all these other services. We don't have that, and we're paying, a higher tax. So why are we paying a higher tax if we're not getting the same services? Now, some people are fine with that to preserve our community and the way we look and the fact that we can always drive to those type of services. Some people aren't. So that will be a major question that we get asked as well. So when I'm looking at comparisons, I'm looking at comparisons of other cities, municipalities, and such like that with similar services, as opposed to size and weighted between commercial and residential.
So through the mayor to the councillor, that's a great idea of what we should be comparing to. I think that could be probably a following stream of the service level review and catalog, and maybe trending and matching from that perspective. I don't know that we're prepared to be able to compare services across the region and a cost per. That's a challenging part from that perspective, but I think that's a great place we could look to go in the future.
Yeah, it's just something that I'm looking at. And it doesn't have to necessarily be another community with 25,000 people. It can be same percentages of people to commercial and what type of services they're getting for the taxes that they're paying and such like that. So that it's just a fair comparison that I'm looking at. I'm looking for those type of comparisons that are going to say, hey, you know what, we're similar to this in this percentage wise. And yeah, statistics are 60% made up. I understand that. But it just gives us a talking point rather than saying, because they'll say, well, you can't compare it to this because they have this, right? So it's just giving us more ammunition, put it that way.
I have a few more slides that'll help demonstrate a little bit of the difference and why, particularly around the tax rate and residents paying more for service compared to others. So,
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Continue on. Thank you.
Okay, so leading into that, so we have residential assessed value, right? So we're right about on par with our neighbors, right? Our assessment base on the resident side is about normal. And then we look at the mill rates, right? And so we're about in the middle. We don't charge any more or less on a mill rate perspective than any other house. When you flip to the non-res side, so we say our mill rates again are about comparable. Wetaskiwin's a little bit of a weird outlier that theirs is like almost 2 and everybody else is floating around the 1 ratio. But then this slide is really the most telling piece. So this is our non-residential assessed value. And so that number is very small for Beaumont. And recognizing that when we looked at budgets are the same across the board, so expenses are the same. And then the house revenue is the assessed value on the houses are the same. So that's the same across the board. But when you drop off the non-residential component, the plug is that it has to be picked up by the residential side. When budgets are the same to your region and the expenses to service it are the same, but then the proportionate cost that it requires the resident to pay on their tax bill is higher. And that's just the byproduct of the relationship or the ratio between our non-residential to residential assessment value. And so it is a valid observation by residents to say that I pay more for my property taxes here compared to another place, but that is part of the Beaumont is built this way and our ratio is that way. While we're trying to move the dial towards more non-res, the reality is that we are residential top heavy, and that's to provide those services and expenses. That's how it's paid for, is on the residential tax bill largely. So some takeaways. So last few slides. So the reality is we don't share the same reality as our neighbors, and that's what we're trying to say, is that our assessment ratio makes apples to apples impossible, right? And we shouldn't be comparing ourselves from a success metric is not what our tax rate is, or even what our mill rate is. From on a like house per house, our house here at a value compared to a house in Leduc at a value, and how much property taxes, because so much of that other, the non-assessment base, the non-res base, all those things factor into that dollar value, and so that shouldn't be a metric that we compare ourselves to, right? Or even what our tax rate increase shouldn't be just because Leduc did this and Spruce Grove did that and Fort Saskatchewan did this. They have a different reality, and for us to hold up, well, they did 3 or 5 or 7 or whatever the numbers they come up with, well, we should be doing that exact same thing, is not a fair baseline. We have our own realities around what our economics is, but also our own realities around our financial position. that they are not we saw the reserve perspective, all of their reserves are much higher than ours. We have to take care of some business from that perspective. So there's going to be additional costs from that perspective. And our communication strategy should be emphasizing our strengths, our differences as strengths, not as weaknesses, right? So we recognize who we are and that we own it, and we're okay with that, and we defend it from that perspective. As I said, our reserve position is trending the wrong direction. We need to make some real changes real soon, or we'll have some real challenges in the not so distant future. And it's not going to be fixed overnight. It's going to take a few years beyond this council's term, to be honest. It'll probably be 2 terms of council in order before we get in a, where I would say, feel comfortable and healthy position from a finances perspective, if we have the courage and discipline to hold the course to get where we need to be. I'm going to skip back to this one. So let's talk about what that actually all means. Okay, so we have the tax increase. So administration is recommending an 8.87% tax revenue requirement increase. That sounds like a big number. When you break it into what it's actually doing, you recognize that only 1.85% of that is associated with the operations budget, right? Which is tied most historically to CPI. The expense to deliver the operating budget is tied to CPI, and CPI is 1.9 right now. So the operations budget is just a little bit below what current CPI is. So that demonstrates that administration is, even with all the fixes, we had some more revenue come in, we were asking for some things that we need, but at the bottom line, the whole increase on the operations side is less than the difference of CPI. The 1.92, so we'll skip, so that's that reserve management piece. So to put some money away for the future to get our reserves healthy is almost 2%, right? So it's very hard to point to that from a residential service, what am I getting for my value? But that's where 1.9% of that is just fiscal health. And then capital, so we talked about asset management. This is the other really hard to be visible component, is that 5% of the tax, 5% of the 8.87% is just for asset infrastructure maintenance and renewal. It's about putting money into the bank accounts to pay for the asset management that we, as I mentioned earlier, we're doing the bare minimum of what we need to keep our assets going. We need more, but this is the start of getting those transfers up to where they need to be. And all of this sounds like a really big number. So when I say 5.1%, in people's minds are like, wow, that's got to be a massive amount of money. 5.1% is about $1.5 million. $1.5 million to additional money for the capital plan. You can't buy anything for $1.5 million, right? It's millions of dollars to build anything. So we're asking for $1.5 million more contribution. It just happens to be the ratio of the budget ask. 5.1% seems outlandish, right? Like, that's, oh my God, that's such a big number. It's only $1.5 million, right? So in context, these are very defensible numbers. You add them all up, yeah, it's maybe a shocking number or a big number, but there is reason why we're asking for this. So what does that look like? So when you took a look at the multi-year perspective, I really just want to highlight the bottom rows. So we, as I said, mentioned at the beginning, short-term pain, long-term gain. Right? So the short-term pain is really this year's budget. We need to start putting money into the bank accounts, and as you remember that reserve replenishment strategy where you got to put the money in and you reap it for all of the years, and it grows and compounds those pieces. We are seeking that first little bit of pinch in 2026. Then it drops off in 2027, but you see that for a while we will not be dropping down to that. Historically, people just think at 2 and 3% is an acceptable tax rate increase because somehow that's tied to CPI. Our financial reality requires that we do more for our reserves and the finances, so we're not looking to go back down to 2s and 3s in the near future. We have to have sustainable reserve contribution growth. That's why we're projecting the numbers that we're looking at into the future. And so this should be the new norm for a period of years until we get our financial health and our asset management back under. Then we can dial it back. Once we get those contributions and it's building up properly and we're sustainable, get back to the 2s and 3s. But this is a problem that I said will there's a way out. There's a vision for where we would like to get to. It does cost, or it requires courage and conviction and discipline to stay the course. So, what does that mean, all of this? So that sounded like a really big number, that 8.87%. So when you look at how this impacts the ratepayer, so based on a $500,000 home, municipal property taxes would be an additional $25 a month, or $300, $305 a year. I'm going to skip to this slide because this one's even more telling. So you take that $25 a month and you split it out between those three sections of the pie. So on the operating section, $5.30 a month is to support ongoing operations, which we'll talk about all of the asks that are coming with the departments. And so you, new police officer, new firefighters, new other things that are coming. For $5 a month, the city gets all of that service increase. Capital transfers, really about maintaining our infrastructure. So $14.62 a month is going to support keeping all of our infrastructure in good shape, alive and running. And that $5.50 is around getting our reserves back into a healthy position. So when 8.87% sounds like a very large number, and oh my God, how could you do that? There's really the impact per resident is not as it's reasonable in my mind. I think this is easily defendable about the pieces that we need to do, the administration needs to do, that the organization needs to do for the long-term health to defend this with residents. So with that, I would take questions. We're 5 minutes over lunch, but.
Councillor Van Newkirk.
Yeah, just one more quick question on the perspective piece here. Each budget, there's a number that 1% tax rate means. Can you just share what that number looks like from this budget? Is it 1% tax equals 280, 290, 260, 250, 300,000? What does that look like?
It's either 302 or 312. I can't remember. I've seen so many numbers in the last week that it's
Okay.
blurry, but I will be able to confirm that after lunch. But it's about roughly $300,000 per 1%.
Okay, thank you for that.
All right. Councillor Tellenboss, do you have any questions before we break for lunch?
Just a really quick one. This is just for Jay. Jay, I noticed that you made reference to a lot of changes that you've made, and by the sounds of it, in your opinion, for the better. Did we have a gap or maybe some deficiencies in how we ran the budget in the past, or is this solely based on your perspective and your beliefs?
Through the mayor to the councillor, deficiency is not a word that I would use. I would say it was a different approach, and I come from I bring a different lens and perspective in the way that we should talk about budget and the approach to do things. This is my 14th budget, so I've got a lot of miles, and I think that I know a way. And so I'm just moving it towards what I think is the best. I can't comment without having experienced past budgets or knowing the way that it was done. And also recognizing that the environment that everybody just came through between COVID, hyper-growth, hyperinflation, no one could have predicted. Even where I came from, it has challenges, and they have higher tax rates than ever anticipated before. So this is not due to negligence or anything from the past. It's consequences of a past environment that everybody navigated in as best way as they could. But now it's about reassessing the landscape and making decisions to go forward.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Penrod.
Thank you, Mayor. And thanks again, Mr. Bohachuk. That's a good segue. Full disclosure, so council has received a briefing on this presentation previously on November 7th, and budget's been kind of in lockup until now. And the intention there was so that council would have a time to reflect on and absorb this presentation and come hopefully with questions that don't just help our understanding, but also help communicate big decisions that we're making to residents. We have the system that we have because not everyone wants to spend or can spend hours and hours of a given week kind of wading through all the budget documents and having these conversations. So thank you for the process. A word that or a concept that we were introduced to, at least I was, it was a new concept for me, during that pre-briefing, was this idea that we're living today in a polycrisis environment, meaning that there were times in our history, in the history of Alberta, let's just draw it that narrow, or Beaumont even narrower, there were times in our history where the land was a lot more stable under our feet, and we're kind of living in a time of rapid change and innovation, and some of that's exciting, but also, I remember a day growing up where there wasn't a town destroyed by a forest fire every summer, kind of thing. So, and if it's not forest fires, it's another thing, and it looks like we're in this for a long haul yet before we're out the other side to a more stable environment. See my comments earlier about Minister Williams and Minister Horner and the Premier talking about the kind of challenging environment that we're in as a province. I guess I wanted to draw it back to this last slide that we're still on here. So there will be conversation in the days ahead around, it looks like we have a lot of medicine to take. What's the strategy around how much of the medicine do we take, how fast? Do we try to flatten this out so it's 7 or 4 equal bites of 7? Is there something to be said for, maybe there's some opportunity if we kick the can down the road a bit, take a 5 this year, maybe some things get better and we can defer the big adjustments till later. I just wanted to share that kind of polycrisis concept because it just doesn't look like anytime soon we're going to be out of crisis mode. And so there's something to be said for the thoughtful way that you've presented. The best day to start saving for your retirement is yesterday. I think we've heard that, just to bring it back to that kind of household perspective. And if you didn't start yesterday, then the next best day is today. So that's kind of the way that I'm seeing. We're gonna listen to the public. We're gonna massage this budget, find every efficiency we can, work it, rework it. That being said, I'm starting in this process with the thought that it might be more advantageous as a community to take more of our medicine sooner, because there is a compounding effect to a lot of these things, as you've illustrated well. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Councillor Penrod, and thank you, Mr. Wahachuk. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, we're going to take a break, a lunch break for 30 minutes.